IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Thursday, April 3rd. We are now one day closer to Notre Dame's spring game and one day closer, more importantly, Trevor, to the 2025 season kicking off. It feels like it's far away, but next thing you know, you're like, seriously, is fall camp starting this week? Like, are you kidding me? That's how this off seasons usually go, man. So we're going to have some fun talking today. Trev and I are kind of going over all these topics we want to discuss and what's a good spring topic, what's a good post-spring topic, what's a good preseason topic. And one of the things we wanted to talk about is kind of related to the spring, and that's looking at the Notre Dame receiver and linebacker positions, Trev. Two positions that are polar opposites. One right now is completely intact as we expect it to be, at least for the rotation for 2025. One doesn't look anything most likely like it's going to look in the fall because guys aren't here or guys are injured, but both are going to be incredibly important to the 2025 season, and both have a chance to be really good. Of course, we're talking about the wide receivers and linebackers. And so what we're going to do today is sort of a bit of a rundown show. We're going to first talk about the wide receiver room and what the spring opportunity is for that room, what the concerns are about who isn't available, but what some of the benefits may be from that. We'll talk about that. We'll kind of talk about some of the younger players, some of the things we're hearing about them, what opportunities are in front of them this spring. And then at linebacker, I feel like there's one certainty, and that's Drake Bowen's going to be your starting middle linebacker, and he's going to be, leader of your defense. Why do I say that? Because that's what he was last year, and I have no reason and have heard nothing to make me think he won't continue that in 2025. However, Trevor, I feel like you and I have sort of taken the linebacker room for granted when it comes from a conversation standpoint. We acknowledge that it's good. We acknowledge that all these three guys are going to play. But as we were talking today, looking through kind of some of the things Max Bullough talked about, it just kind of hit us like, we really need to dive into this room to talk about, like, there is a battle that's raging. And then not just for who's going to start, who's going to be number, but who's going to be number two, who's going to be number three, does somebody else force their way into rotation, and talk about, what these guys all bring to the table and how it could impact the linebacker room depending on how these guys perform. So we're going to talk about all that. And then, of course, Trevor, at the end of the show, we're going to do a mailbag. We've already got 12 mailbag questions starred already. Go ahead and throw that in there. Put MB on there, and then you can put your question. You can also put a mailbox emoji on there as well, and we'll see that. That way we know the difference between a mailbag question and just normal chatter. So this is going to be interesting, Trev. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about these things. I'm looking forward to hearing what the chat thinks about these things as we talk about them. But man, another day to talk Notre Dame football, man. What could be better?
It's going to be a really good conversation today, man, and I'm excited. These are two position groups that are getting a lot of attention from you and I, from people on the message boards, from national other outlets, and they're getting a lot of attention for two different reasons. Brian, you have not been shy. I have not been shy about talking about how good we believe that this linebacker room can be. On Tuesday, we broke down kind of what rooms we believe to be in the best position at this point in the spring. And linebacker was number one for us on defense and number two overall on the entire team. And I think you're right. I think some of it was a little bit for granted of well, you know what, whoever you slot in there, it doesn't matter. But fact of the matter is it kind of does, because you did lose a guy like Jack Kaiser. You do have young guys coming up. So I'm excited to have that conversation. We all weathered the storms from last night. That was some pretty crazy stuff going on. So if anybody else in the chat, anybody else listening also had to kind of work through those last night, hope everybody's safe and everybody's good to go today. But Brian, as always, I'm excited to talk some Notre Dame ball with you, man.
You talk about those storms, Trev. Angela's actually, as I told everyone, is out of town right now. She's down in Syracuse doing a little week retreat, which she does every year. She texted me last night. She's like, hey, by the way, going down to the storm shelter, there's a tornado warning. So, of course, I get on the internet right away, and there's like literally one had touched down in the county she's in. I'm like, great. These storms this week suck. But we didn't lose power, and as far as I know, everyone ended up coming out of it okay. So hopefully that continues. But, yeah, it's just life in the Midwest, man. It's that time of year, as you and I were talking about, Trev. It's definitely that time of year. But it's also that time of year to talk Notre Dame football. And today's first topic, we are going to talk about the wide receivers, because this is a very interesting room, Trev. And part of what kind of got me thinking I want to talk about the receivers is just listening to you talk and listening to your evolution of how you talk about the receiver room this offseason. I think it's very symbolic of how a lot of us think and feel about this room, which is there's times when I can see the excitement about the potential of the room in your voice. There's times where I get some hesitancy in your voice as you start thinking about the what ifs in the room. And we're not going to really know what this room looks like right now in the spring because we're not going to get to see Malachi Fields. We're not seeing Will Pauling at 100% right now. Jordan Faison, there's some days he's not there. And there's still a lot to learn about this room. And especially, even if it was just Malachi Fields isn't there, that's a pretty big piece to this whole puzzle. Micah Gilbert is obviously out for the spring. We'll have more about that on Saturday once we get official word from Marcus Freeman on what's going on with him, and we'll be able to let you guys know what we heard at that point in time. I know some other people have reported it. I was told not to, so I'm going to do that because I don't want to get in trouble. It's one of those things, Trev, where the downside is, man, you're just not going to get a chance to see what your room looks like this spring. And that's disappointing. But then as you think about it, you're like, this is also a great opportunity for Notre Dame, though. That's two very important pieces to the puzzle that are getting no reps this spring, which may not be good for them, especially Micah Gilbert, because he still has more to prove. I don't really care that Malachi Fields isn't here this spring. Perfect world, I'd rather he be here, but I'm not losing sleep over him not being here because he'll have all of June, all of July, all of August to get on the same page with the Notre Dame quarterbacks. I'm not worried about that. He's a proven player. It's more, Micah Gilbert needed the work. There's no saying this is actually a good thing because Micah Gilbert needed that work. But he also has shown a lot during his time here where I think they're going to kind of quickly incorporate him back in once he's good to go. And it was nothing lower body, which is huge. It was nothing that you look at and say this is an injury that's going to have long-term ramifications, that type of thing. So that's good. But what it has also done, Trevor, is it's opened up opportunities for players to get a lot more reps that really needed those reps. With Will Pauling out, not out, but on a limited basis this spring, with occasionally Jordan Faison being out, or sometimes you got to limit how much Jordan Faison can go because they may have a game the next day or he played a game the day before. So they've got to really monitor his workload because he's a great athlete, but he's not a big athlete. You got to make sure and Marcus Freeman's talked about this. I'm not sharing anything that's not already kind of known, but you got to look at it and say, okay, well they've got to, they've got to kind of make sure that they're monitoring him and being smart with what they're doing with him. So you look at it, Trev, and you start saying, okay, well, what are some of those benefits to this situation? Well, I think one of the benefits, the biggest benefit to me is I look at this room and I say, this is an opportunity for some of these younger players to get a lot of reps. This is an opportunity for Cam Williams to get a lot more reps that he wouldn't have otherwise. There's a lot of opportunities for KK Smith to get reps that he maybe wouldn't have otherwise. Logan Salate. And then of course the freshman class. And what we're hearing some good things. We're hearing some things like, work in progress. This guy's really performing well. We've seen some limited things and what we've been out there. But the reality is these guys are getting an opportunity to get coached, to get a lot more focus on them. You talked about Mike Brown talking about Cam Williams and how he's going against Leonard Moore every time. Guess what? That's going to look really good. That's going to work out really well for Cam Williams, hopefully. And so we want to kind of talk about that, Trev, and then, what we're hearing about all these kids, but then also what this spring opportunity is, but also what the expectations are and what these players could add to the mix. And of course, we're going to get a chance to see them on Saturday, which is important. But let's talk, Trev, about this receiver room and focusing on obviously not having certain guys here, the opportunities that it opens up because some young guys who otherwise would have been sort of fighting for just reps are getting a ton of reps. And it's a very important period for those young players, especially those young players.
Yeah, Notre Dame's wide receiver room has been an interesting topic of conversation with me really since the national championship got over with and we started having offseason conversations on January 21st. And a lot of where my optimism comes from is backed by a lot of projection. The only player that I'm not really projecting on is Jaden Greathouse. If he can just continue to do what and I'm not talking about every game he should have 6 catches for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. I would love it if that happened. But that's not my expectation for him. You know what I mean? It's the expectation is more what you did against Louisville and staying clutch on 3rd down, and then having a few games sprinkled in there where you are the Jaden Greathouse against Penn State, where you are the Jaden Greathouse against Ohio State. But I would say out of the room as a whole, he's really the only player that I'm not, if this, and this kind of all pans out, I think we're in a good spot. The only other player that I have that feeling with is Malachi Fields, who's not yet on campus.
Yeah.
A lot of the conversation with him is if you just pick up where you left off from Virginia, Notre Dame's receiving room is going to be in a good spot.
Right. Like honestly, even if Malachi Fields is here, same with Jaden Greathouse. I don't care what Jaden Greathouse does this spring. Meaning, I don't care, meaning I just want to be healthy because he dominated last spring. He's a guy that went out in the national semifinals and dominated. He's a guy that went out in the national championship game and dominated. Like, I don't care what Jaden Greathouse does in practice anymore. I now, the only thing I care about now with Jaden Greathouse is what is he going to do in games and how good can he be? Like, he's earned that because he played a full season. Even though his production in the regular season wasn't ideal or what he's capable of for a host of reasons, what it comes down to for me, Trevor, is he still made a lot of plays during the regular season. Like, we focus on the last 2 games, like, hey, welcome to the season, Jaden Greathouse. And it's like, no, that's not what it was. I mean, you think back to the huge 3rd down catch against Texas A&M. You know, you think of the big, he had 2 big plays against Louisville. He had the play early in the game where I think his first drive of the game where he kind of gets free on an over route and Riley Leonard scrambling. He finds Jaden, who snuck behind the defense, got open for a big play. Then, of course, you've got the 34-yard touchdown pass or reception that he had in that game and kind of really sparked the Notre Dame team to going off. You think about the great route he ran on the first drive against Navy for a big play. He made a great back shoulder catch against Georgia Tech in that game as well. You know, you just kind of think about some of those things. He had a couple really nice after the catch plays against Florida State. So, like, there was always those flashes of, okay, he had some big moments. And that's why it was, when we saw what he did in the last 2 games, it wasn't like, wow, I didn't know Jaden Greathouse could do that. I hope he can continue. It was like, it's about time, you know, because, like, you felt like in it, when you break down the film, you feel like he should have had more production just on how often he was open. Things didn't work out that way. But now it's like, I don't really care if he goes out there and dominates in spring practice. I care that what he's going to do in the fall. Now, what he's doing to work and get better and all that, of course, plays a role in that. But it's like, okay, it's not something that I really want to spend a lot of shows on from a developmental standpoint. But when I look at this room, I also kind of feel like, okay, I know what Jordan Faison can do. I know what Will Pauling can do. The question of how good this receiver room is going to be is twofold. Number one is, can the proven players play to their potential that we've seen? Can Malachi keep doing what he's been doing? That's all you need him to do. If he's better than that, that's huge. But I just need him to be what he was the last 2 years. I just need Jaden Greathouse to kind of be what he was all year on his 5 or 6 best games. I mean, take away the last 2 games, just be what you were against Florida State, Louisville, and Georgia Tech consistently. And then occasionally, like you said, you'll have those big games. With Jordan Faison, it's, dude, stay healthy. And then the staff's got to find a way to better use him. With Will Pauling, I just want to see the 2023 version of you. That's it. You know, I mean, we know what they can do. They've got to play to a certain level for this room to be steady, consistent, and play at a level that this team can really maximize its potential as an overall unit. But I believe, for the receiving core as a whole to really take that step where they're not only part of a championship caliber offense, but they're a driver of one, then they've got to me, they need a couple of these younger guys to step up because there are some very unique skill sets in there. And that's really what I think what I care most about this spring. And some of those guys not being around, Jaden Greathouse maybe not always getting as many reps as he would have last spring because of the work he got during the season. It's opened up some of those opportunities, and I think that's huge. And I think we're going to start with the guy that's the biggest name of this group, and we'll kind of work down the list. And this is a great opportunity for Cam Williams. You know, a kid that struggled early on in his tenure at Notre Dame, making an adjustment from a guy that the game plan in high school is like, dude, just get Cam the ball and then go to let him work. Now he's got to be a more nuanced player. He's got to know this. He's got to learn that, how to do this, how to do that. And that's something he struggled with as a freshman. Well, now you get out in the spring and you're like, well, how are you going to get work for him? You've got, you got Malachi Fields on the roster now. You've got Micah Gilbert. You brought in Will Pauling. Like, what kind of opportunities? Well, Malachi's not going to be here till the summer. Micah Gilbert's out. Will Pauling is limited. Tremendous opportunity to get a ton of reps for Cam Williams. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Cam Williams stepping up could have the biggest impact on this receiving core of whether or not it can be pretty good or elite. And he's not there yet, but this is more of a look at what's he going to be. He's a guy that, to me, of all the players we're going to talk about, if the light can go on for him, this is a guy that's got a chance to really change the way that this team, how this team looks, how this team feels, and the ability of this team to really be dynamic on offense.
Yeah, Cam Williams is kind of the driver of the car of raising the floor of this wide receiver room. Because to your point, we know what those top-end guys can do. We just need them to repeat premier performances. But when you look at a guy like Cam Williams, I think about, I don't know if anybody else saw this, but Nick Saban went on to the Pivot podcast, the podcast that Ryan Clark does. And he was talking about Derrick Henry in his freshman year and how the offensive coordinator was getting after him because he didn't understand pass sets and he didn't understand how to pick up certain blitzes and different disguised line games. And the offensive coordinator was getting after him. And Nick Saban came in and said he pulled Derrick Henry aside and was like, look, man, what's going on? Like, you look a little lost out there. And Derrick Henry was basically like, Coach, they didn't ask me to do any of this in high school. They lined me up, they tossed me the ball, and they told me to run to the end zone. And if you go back and look at his stats in high school, that's exactly what he did. And I have very similar feelings about Cam Williams. He, to me, is kind of that unicorn in the wide receiver room. He's 6'2". He's a good size. Kid's an absolute burner. They're lining him up to take snaps in the boundary with Malachi Fields and Micah Gilbert, not currently participating for different reasons. So he's one of the guys that kind of fits this new age Mike Denbrock offense where he wants his receivers to play multiple different spots in the offense. He doesn't want to just have this identity of, all right, you're just our boundary guy, and that's where you're going to play all 78 snaps of offense today. We're just sticking you in the boundary, and we're going to leave you there. Some games might dictate that with Malachi. Who knows? But Cam Williams has the opportunity to really raise the floor of this room because of the skill sets that he has. You mentioned earlier in the show when we first started about how Mike Brown, in the comments that he made in his press conference, he flat out said, look, he's lining up against Leonard Moore every day. That's not something I would have asked him to do last season. And so for that growth, just in a calendar year for a kid like Cam Williams is absolutely huge. Brian and I talk all the time about what opportunities are available for players in the spring. And it's easy to just blanket statement and say, well, Cam Williams has a chance to step up. And now we're starting to hear it. We're starting to see it. We're starting to see him develop and come into his own, which is really, really exciting. He's somebody that can absolutely be a difference maker on this offense, for sure.
Now, I still think Cam is a work in progress, very much a work in progress. And that's what's so important about this time. Because what I see from Cam and what was been available to us is like it was confirmation of, okay, he is the elite athlete that I thought he was. I haven't seen a single rep of him against Leonard Moore. I haven't seen a single rep of him against Carson Hobbs. I haven't seen a single rep of him against Christian Gray or Adon Schuler over the middle or anything. I haven't seen any of that. And so that's still sort of the unknown. The opportunities are there. He's learning. Everybody that I've talked to multiple people at Cam, like, look, he's learning a lot. These reps are great. He's come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done with Cam. And at this point in time, when you look at a guy like Cam Williams, when you look at this opportunity, this comment's not a response to like what we've seen or anything I've been told, or it's just a general statement about a young man like Cam and the opportunities in front of him. It really comes down to, this is about you at this point in time. This is about you. This is about like Cam Williams and KK Smith and Elijah Burrus and Logan Salate. It's the message to all of them is, do you understand the opportunity that's in front of you? And what are you going to do with it? And that's really, where we're about, a little over halfway through spring, about halfway through spring now with the practices that they've had. And okay, you've seen good growth, but a lot of times, and this is what I love about why this topic is happening today and why one of the reasons we chose to do it today is because I look at it and say, okay, now what you do from now until the end of spring is ultimately what's going to determine your success level. So let's just say that we've heard that Cam Williams has been killing it in practice for the first halfway through spring practice. All right, great. But now that your defensive players have a little bit of a read on you and then they start doing things and all of a sudden you don't finish well, then you're not going to go into the offseason with a lot of good momentum. Like, well, okay, I'm glad we're getting Micah and Malachi back, or, we'll get Will Pauling back or whatever, depending on the play we're talking about. But on the flip side, let's say that we heard that Cam has been struggling for the first half of spring practice, right? The flip side. If he plays really well down the stretch, then you go into the season with a lot of offseason with a lot of momentum. The confidence in you has built with the quarterbacks and with the coaching staff. And so no matter what he's done up to this point in time, Trevor, and we've heard a lot of good things about Cam, also continue to hear that he's just starting to scratch the surface. There's a lot of work to be done. The question for Cam is, okay, what are you going to do moving forward? How are you going to finish? Like, do you get locked in for the second half of the spring? Are you taking some of the lessons and this is true for KK and all of them. Are you going to take those lessons and really apply them? Do you start making more plays? Because it's like this, especially this is specific to Cam. If you can go out there in the second half of spring and start making some plays against Leonard and Moore with some level of consistency, then you've proven you can make plays against anybody in college football. And that's sort of the tremendous opportunity there, because Cam is a guy that's got – you talked about the fit into Mike Denbrock's offense from the standpoint of he likes to move guys around, and that's a great observation, and I fully agree. But on the flip side, he's also the kind of guy that brings an element to the offense that Mike Denbrock needs from the standpoint of he's also tall, he's also fast, he's also a playmaker. He's also someone that can do things after the catch. He's someone that can stretch the field. He's someone that can do a lot of the different things that Mike Denbrock wants, but can he do it consistently? Can he do it against the best players? So stylistically, he can fit and be an impact player. The question, however, is can he do it with enough consistency to warrant him getting work come the fall? And that's going to be determined not by what he's done so far in spring practice, good or bad. It's going to be determined by what he does moving forward. And that's what gets you excited about it, because like the opportunities are there for Cam Williams to step up and say, hey, this is a great opportunity for me. I'm going to go seize it. I'm going to go take hold of it. And it really comes down to the question for a guy like him, Trevor. It's a lot like Chase Claypool. It's a lot like Miles Boykin. It's a lot like Kevin Austin. It's a lot like, a lot of these like really talented kids at Notre Dame. Some have played well early, some haven't. Will Fuller. How good do you want to be? That's really what it comes down to. How good do you want to be? And the question there is, okay, how he answers that question is going to tell us what kind of impact he's going to be, because the opportunity's there. And if Cam's like, no, I want to be great at this, so I'm going to be a sponge, I'm going to take coaching, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, then guess what? He's going to have a great opportunity to go out there and be a difference maker. And that's really what is going to be the key part to how the spring finishes for him. Because as I said, Trevor, man, there's no player that has the talent to have a greater impact on this offense than Cam Williams. You talk about, well, they don't have a Malik Neighbors or a Brian Thomas on the roster. Well, if they're going to have one, it's going to be him. He's got the tools to be that guy. He's just got to show if he has the intangibles to be that guy. And that's the opportunity that's in front of Cam, and I'm very curious to see what we see from him here as we finish the spring.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be somebody that's going to be really exciting to follow. And I agree. I think you could say that Cam Williams probably has the highest ceiling of anybody in that room in terms of what his impact can be at Notre Dame over the course of his career. But he does have to take a little bit of ownership and say, hey, look, I've now taken the step in the right direction. That can't be it. It can't be, I've taken the step in the right direction, so now I've arrived. You have to have a good mix of, okay, I'm starting to understand. Like it's not new anymore. And now you have to take that and run with it. So for me, I'm really, really excited to see what goes on with Cam Williams the rest of the spring. Really excited that we get to go up and see a full practice on Saturday. And then a week after that's the blue gold game. So I think, especially with the blue gold game, I'm hoping that a lot of the things that we're talking about are going to come to fruition, which is really, really exciting to see, especially when we're talking about a guy like Cam Williams, because he can provide that aspect to Notre Dame's offense that it hasn't had consistently in quite some time. And then you pair him with guys like Malachi Fields and Will Pauling and Greathouse and Faison and hopefully Micah Gilbert. That's going to make for a really, really tough passing attack to stop, man. And I'm excited to watch it all unfold. That's absolutely for sure.
The other guy that I think has a tremendous opportunity this spring, who I also think his emergence could have a big impact on this team if he's able to step up, is KK Smith. And it's for similar reasons that we talked about with Cam Williams. He just brings it, and we've talked about this before, Trev. He brings a speed element to the table that they just don't have. And he's another guy that's getting a lot of opportunities this spring. And we've seen flashes of that big-time ability in the past. He's going into his junior year. I think this is a make-or-break time for KK Smith. It's almost kind of like with the presence of Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert, who are younger than him, and Logan Salate, who's younger than him, who we'll talk about. Talk about Elijah Burrus and Scrap Richardson and the guys that you're going to be bringing in next year, potential portal options. It's kind of like you're going into your junior year when you talk about KK Smith. If it doesn't happen now, you almost get to the point where it's like, I don't know that it's going to happen. Now, I know he's a redshirt sophomore, but still, he's going into his third year of college. He's had multiple injuries, showed up injured, got injured last year. You know, he's a guy where it's very clear what he needs to learn to do. We've talked about this multiple times already. He's got a guy that's got to get stronger. He's got to play stronger because his playmaking potential is immense. But you've got to be able to be a good route runner, win at the line of scrimmage, win at the catch point, break tackles, do all those type of things. And this is his chance to kind of prove that he can be that playmaker. Because like you said, love Will Pauling's potential, love Jaden Greathouse, love Jordan Faison, love, but the reality is outside of Cam Williams, maybe Malachi Fields, there's nobody that you're just like, just go. You're just really fast. Go be fast. And that's what's exciting about, where Cam is got a chance to make an impact here.
Yeah, KK Smith is a kid for me that I don't know how to feel about him, if I'm being 100% honest. Love the skill set of having the raw speed, but him going into his junior year of college, there's some things that are pretty big question marks that's kind of hard for me to overlook. It's tough for me to say, man, he could be just such a good player if he gets stronger, if he gets a little bigger, and if he can stay healthy. Whereas the conversation with Cam Williams is he's just raw and he has to develop into a better football player. Not to make it sound like I'm writing off KK Smith, because he can absolutely be a very valuable part of this offense. And he is still relatively young into his career. But I do agree. There's now the opportunity for, if Cam Williams has the spring that we think, and if Micah Gilbert comes back healthy, and if Logan Salate, somebody we're going to talk about here in a minute, continues to improve, what does that mean for a player like KK Smith? Ideally, in the spirit of raising the room, the floor of the room, that will then elevate KK Smith to get better, and then so on and so forth, and he becomes a valuable asset to this offense. But for me, the thing that makes me the most nervous about him is the injury history conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's just, I have more faith in, and this isn't Cam Williams or KK Smith specific. This is just how I feel about football players in general. I have more faith in a raw player coming into his own than, say, a player remaining healthy, because there is an aspect out of that that's kind of out of their control. Like, some players are just more prone to injury, and that's scary. And I hope that's not the case for KK, because when he is healthy, you do see the flashes of what he can do in this offense. So I'm really, really hoping that kind of all comes together for him this spring.
Part of the reason I'm so excited about this, Trev, is because we just talked about two guys that bring that kind of potential to the room. You'd have to go like 0 for 2 in that instance for you not to get some sort of impact. And if we're being honest about this, and I don't know why that expression, like somebody pointed that out to me one time, and now it just sticks in my head, just every time I say it. Of course, I'm always honest with you, but it's one of those things where you really just need one of them to step up. Ideally, you'd get both of them to step up, but you just need one of them to step up. And that's why, it's really important for both of them, but you got to need one of them to step up. But they're both getting so much more work now because of all the guys that are out. And that's what's so, kind of the focal point here is it's like if you don't take advantage of the opportunity now, it's going to be a lot harder for you to do it in the fall. Because if you can't take advantage of the opportunity now, that opportunity may not be there in the fall. And that's a big part of this conversation. And why it's so important that these guys step up this spring. You could kind of throw Logan Salate into the mix. And one of the reasons that I'm frustrated by the lack of opportunity for us to see these guys this spring is because there are so many young players that we could be talking about right now. And I understand where coaches come from and all this other stuff about exposure. But look, we're in the NIL world. And whether you like it or not as an institution, us talking, a guy becoming a name, like everybody's talking about this guy, that's an opportunity for those guys to then market themselves and get some NIL opportunities. And I wish that we could be talking about some of these guys more based on what we've seen, which could open up some of those opportunities. But, they want to shut off access and not let people be at practice and all those type of things, which then limits those opportunities. And it's not like they're putting out videos every day from practice. They put like one receiver video out. You never see anything except like them catching the ball in those things. So it is what it is, but you have to then rely on what you hear from different people. And what I've heard from different people is this is a great opportunity. This has been a good spring so far for Logan Salate. He has solid size. He's 5'11", 6 feet tall. He's a guy that can do some things after the catch. He's got some vertical speed, and he's another guy that's got playmaking ability. As we can keep going down this list, that's something we hear a lot of with these younger players. And that's why it's so important, because they bring an element that they don't have a lot of. They haven't had a lot of at receiver in recent seasons. That doesn't mean that Greathouse and Faison can't be those players. We saw both of them show those opportunities. But we also saw that when certain guys went down with injury, that was now gone. That element was gone because nobody else could do what Jordan Faison can do, for example. Well, if Logan and KK and Will Pauling are all playing well, in that instance, you're now in a position where, okay, yeah, it stinks that you lost this guy, but you're going to be okay because this guy steps up and this guy steps up and this guy steps up. You also don't need to there's no reason for Jaden Greathouse to have 900 snaps next year. Keep them fresh, because one of the benefits of the way this season went, Trev, is when you look at the number of snaps that Jaden Greathouse played, he didn't play some of wow, what a high volume of plays that guy played. He didn't play a lot of those type of things. And what that did, because they did play a pretty good sized rotation last year, is I think that allowed Jaden Greathouse to be fresh enough to go make some of the plays he made late in the season. Here's what I'm referring to. Last season, when you look at the number of snaps that Jaden Greathouse played for, now this is a kid that didn't miss any games last season, but Jaden Greathouse last year played 493 snaps. That's a lot of reps. But you look at the Penn State team, Jaylen Reed, guy that he made kind of fall down late in the game, he played 902 snaps last year. Zakee Wheatley, their other safety, played 884. A.J. Harris, the corner, played 729. Jalen Kimber, their other corner, played 704. It's a lot of snaps that those guys played last year. You look at Ohio State, Caleb Downs, who Jaden Greathouse made look silly in the title game with that spin move, played 917 snaps last year. Lathan Ransom played 823. Jordan Hancock, who Jaden Greathouse beat for a touchdown in that game, 730. Davison Igbinosun, 810. Denzel Burke, 721. Again, 493 for Jaden Greathouse. And when you look at the Notre Dame receiving core, You got Bo Collins had 670, Mitchell 478, Jaden 493, Faison 401, Jaden Thomas 340, Jaden Harrison 211, Deion Colsey 132. And now you're like, okay, maybe we kind of saw the story's the same, by the way, for the Indiana DBs. And all of a sudden in the postseason, we're seeing these guys get more separation in the postseason than we saw at times in the regular season. Why? Well, part of it is because Mike Brown, I think, did a great job developing the younger players last year. They benefited more from his presence, I think, than the older players because there was less deprogramming going on with those guys. They hadn't been in college as long. But so we started to see these guys stepping up. But the other reason, Trev, is they're fresher. But you also, when you have the schedule Notre Dame plays, you also can't just throw guys out there just to put them out there. They're guys that have to go out there and say, hey, you got to earn your right to be out there. Can you trust Logan Salate and Cam Williams and KK Smith with the number of reps that you gave Chris Mitchell last year? 478. Can you trust them with the three to handle some of the clutch 340 that Jaden Thomas played? Jaden Thomas only played 340 snaps. That's not a ton. I mean, it wasn't even his career high. In 2022, he had over 500. He didn't catch a lot of passes last year for Notre Dame. He's had more productive seasons than he had last year at Notre Dame. You look at Jaden's numbers last year, he caught 18 passes for 167 yards, averaged 9.3 yards a catch. Carried the ball 3 times for 27 yards. But here's what Jaden Thomas did last year. He was clutch. He was money. He was then there on import. He didn't play a whole lot against Louisville, but he got a very important 4th down grab against Louisville. You know what I mean? Where it was literally an ISO route. We're throwing it to Jaden. You got to win. And he did. Who takes those snaps? Right now, if you're Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock going into the season before spring starts, well, right now, those guys haven't proven anything to us. So we're going to have to give more snaps to Faison, give more snaps to Jaden Greathouse, give more snaps to Malachi. You've got Will Pauling coming in, but that's one proven transfer compared to the 2 proven transfers you lost, plus the proven player you lost in Jaden Thomas. So right now, that's, almost like 900 snaps that you got to now split up that until other guys prove otherwise, are going to have to go to Jaden Thomas or Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Malachi Fields. So then the question becomes, okay, can these other guys prove themselves worthy of taking on some of those snaps? That's the other part of it. And if there's an injury, can these guys step in and ensure that the level of play is the same? Those are all things that right now we don't have answers to. But when you start getting excited, when you start thinking about some of these younger players that are coming back for their 2nd or 3rd season, you start to say, like, boy, they could really benefit this team if they can earn their way onto the field to spell the veterans and give those veterans a chance to not to play as many snaps, number 1. Number 2, but if they can come on the field and make plays, that's a nightmare for a defense. Because if I'm in the 4th quarter of a game and my corner is going on snap 70, and one series he's going against Cam Williams, who's on snap 20, and the next play he's going against Micah Gilbert, who's on snap 20, or Malachi Fields, who's on snap 40, guess who's fresher in the 4th quarter of that game? The Notre Dame receivers. Guess who's fresher in November, in December, and January? The guy that's going on snap 500 or the guy who's going on snap 800? That's an important thing. But when that's all fine and dandy, but when guy going on snap 20 doesn't scare me as a defensive back, it's not a disadvantage for me. When the guy going on snap 15 is somebody I can lock down at 90%, that doesn't scare me. You're just now giving that guy a breather. That's it. Can you step onto the field and be a playmaker? And that's really what we're talking about here with these 3 guys, Trevor. It's not can Logan Salate or KK or Cam Williams prove themselves worthy of playing 10 to 15 snaps a game as a rotation guy to take the burden off the veterans. That's one thing. That's not getting you back to the championship game. What they truly need and the opportunity that's truly in front of these guys if they want to seize it is, can you become a playmaker for us? when you're a coach and you're looking at them, say, look, I need you to step in and make plays. When you're on the field for Malachi, I need you to threaten the defense just like he did. Not meaning you're going to run the same plays, but more so you're a threat, he's a threat. We'll tailor the offense to fit what you do well. I'm not going to ask you to pretend you're 6'4". I'm just saying, like, you've got to be in there. I'm not asking Logan Salate or KK Smith to be like Jordan Faison or Jaden Greathouse. But when they're on the field, they need to be the playmaking threat that Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse are. That's the key. That's what they're working for. That's the opportunity that's in front of these younger players, because that's going to determine whether I get 15, 20 snaps a game against Purdue, maybe Arkansas, Navy, Stanford, Syracuse, Pitt, Boston College, or am I getting those same number of snaps against Miami? Am I getting those same number of snaps against Texas A&M? Because in those games where I need playmakers, I'm going to be a lot less willing to go with my full rotation if those guys haven't proven to me that they can go out there and make plays. And ultimately, that's what Logan, what KK, and what Cam need to prove from here on out. But what's exciting, Trevor, and why I get so fired up about this group and why I'm so adamant to talk about them is because they are playmakers. They are talented kids. We're not asking any of them to play beyond their potential. Just play to your potential. None of them have so far. But what's exciting about this opportunity is they all get that shot. None of those three guys can end the spring and say, man, I wish I would have had a better opportunity, more reps to prove myself. That's none of them can say that, Trev.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, man, the opportunity's right in front of them on the table for kind of some of the factors that are taking away from this room in the spring that some like to focus on. But the opportunity for all the young players, there's no question that it's there. I'm in agreement with you, man. They're not, at least the way that I look at it, you might have a different stance on this. But I love Cam Williams, KK Smith, Logan Salate. I don't think, no matter how good of a spring that they have, Cam Williams isn't going to dethrone Malachi Fields from the boundary when he gets on campus. No. You know what I mean? Like, KK Smith is not
barring
going
injury.
To take – sure.
Yeah. Or
sure.
Malachi just shows up and all he's been doing all offseason is eating, 2 Papa John's pizzas every night, and not working out,
Yes. Yes. I mean, nobody's going to dethrone Jaden Greathouse. So it's not a conversation of, hey, if you work hard enough, you could be the starter day one down in Miami. But you need those impact role guys. Notre Dame has had that in some better passing offenses that they've had in years past. They had that with David Grimes in 2006. In the final drive, you talked about the UCLA game last year, or you talked about the UCLA game yesterday, and everybody remembers Samardz's catch. David Grimes had a clutch catch to put them in position to get that touchdown in that year. I think of guys like Chris Fink in 2018. Everybody talks about Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool and some of the exciting players that they had. They need that Chris Fink guy. And they now have a bunch of younger players who all have the opportunity to do that. In pertains to Logan Salate, he reminds me of a slightly bigger version of a Jordan Faison. Same traits, similar traits, might be a little bit faster, a little bit more of a vertical threat. But Notre Dame has diversity in their wide receiver room, but it's not just with the guys at the top. They have it spread throughout the room, which is why I get excited about it. We talked about how some of my tone has started to evolve when talking about this group, and that's why they don't just have 4 6'5" guys that can kind of all do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Or they don't just have
a bunch of 5'10" to 6 foot guys that can all do the same thing. Yes. Which is, I'll say this, Trev, if these players, and this is my fear, if these guys don't step up that we've talked about, and then we'll talk about Micah Gilbert in this regard in the fall when he's back, because he'll need to then prove that he's ready to force himself on the field too. If Cam and KK and Logan Salate, and then Logan's kind of different because he's kind of like the guys that are there now. But if KK and Cam especially, and I'll throw Elijah Burrus into this conversation as well, we'll talk about him more in a second. If they don't do what you're talking about, the concern that I have is now outside of Malachi, you do have a lot of they're all kind of the same guy at receiver. There's not a lot of difference between Will Pauling and Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse. I mean, there's some minor differences here and there, and they can do some different things. But in a lot of ways, they're kind of the same guy. They're attacking you the same way. They're short to intermediate guys. They're chain movers. They're after the catch a little bit. There's nobody that's bringing a skill set that's just different. Whereas if KK Smith, if his performance this spring says to Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock, you better find a way to use me. His play forces them to do that. When he's on the field, you know how you are now attacking teams with a very uniquely different skill set. When Cam Williams on the field, because Cam's playing boundary now out of necessity. When Malachi and Micah get back, you'll see Cam doing both Z and X. When you're using him either in the boundary or especially to the field, if you want to go bigger, he brings a completely different skill set to the table than what the other receivers that are playing the Z and the slot will show you. And that's why I also think it's important, Trevor, that they seize this opportunity, because they give you something that forces the defense to defend you in a different way. And that can be challenging for a team. Very challenging for a team. And, you know, it's nerve-wracking and also exciting all at the same time, Trev, because there's still a long way to go. You know, it's like you could read the practice reports that we were putting up, and I'm talking about how good Williams looked in drills, and people are all excited and in the breakout and all this. And I'm like, I keep telling y'all, we haven't watched a single one-on-one rep. We haven't watched a single 7-on-7 rep. We haven't watched a single team rep. That's the stuff that matters. What I was happy about was this confirmed that the athleticism that we thought he had is there. That's there. The talent is there. Now it's about, can you be a football player? And that's what Cam still has to prove, and what KK still has to prove, and what Logan still has to prove at this level. We know they could do it in high school, but can you do it at this level? But I think Cam and KK especially, you need one of them to step up is because, like, if Logan Saldate steps up and forces away on the field, that's great. But what it ensures is if one of those other three guys is off the field, talking about Jaden, Jordan, and Will, or one of them gets hurt or whatever the case may be, you can put a guy in there that has a skill set similar to theirs, and, you know, maybe you don't miss a beat. And that's great. That's awesome. But I still feel there's a need for them to be able to throw some different skills at teams that they couldn't last year. Like looking at last year, and we talked about this during the season. The concern was, who were you afraid of running by you last year? There wasn't anybody. Everything that Notre Dame did was sort of 20 and in, and in a lot of ways 15 and in last season. And that's it forced. We talked about, you know, why couldn't they run a lot of slip screens? Well, when teams are 8-9 in the box post snap, 8 in the box post snap, slip screens not really something that's going to be great, because teams weren't necessarily like heavy blitzes against Notre Dame. They would maybe bring heavy to a side or some things like that, but they had to have success in the screen game. You had to either do the quick screens that were beating the blitz, or they had the best design screen all year was that sprint out throwback to Jeremiah Love. But why did you have to sprint out? Because you had to do something to force the defense to go in a direction and come back to it. So that's the thing, is you need to be able to say, hey, listen, you want to come up and play cover one? That's fine. We're going to be able to hurt you. As we discussed last season, Trev, the reality is when Jordan Faison is in a game, he does a lot of good things. That's not something that a team is afraid of. We saw it in games. You know, he's short. He's not a burner, so he can't just like run by you the way that, you know, he's more shifty and quick and elusive and things like that. And he's not a guy that's just going to go out and win a ton of contested catches. Just not his game. So don't ask him to, and props to the staff for not asking him to be that. They didn't throw him a ton of deep balls last year because they know that's not a strength of his. But if you can have someone that can complement him with a skill set like that, that makes him more effective as well. And then that allows you to maybe move him around at times. So I'm excited to see what this group can do to finish the spring, Trev. I really am. And I love what I'm hearing so far. But every time I talk to a different source about one of these young guys, it's always like good, but ... long way to go type of thing. So whereas last year at times it was kind of like, yeah, this guy's a long way away. I'm not hearing that as much anymore about this room. And that's a good thing. And now it's about finish strong. That's what these three guys need to do. I want to talk about one more guy before we move on to linebackers, Trevor, and that's Elijah Burrus, because he's in a little bit of a different category because he's a true freshman. Yeah, I'll just be honest. There wasn't a lot of buzz coming into the spring or coming into the semester, I should say, about Elijah Burrus helping out right now. Now, I know for a fact that the coaching staff loved his potential. That's why he was one of the first guys that Mike Brown said, hey, we got to go get that guy. You know, I was high on him coming out of high school. I loved the pickup when they went after him early on. Even though his dad played at my rival high school, I still thought he could play. You know, didn't hold that against him. But there's been a little bit of a surprise at how quickly he's proven to be that guy. Heard great things about him in the weight room, starting all the way back in January. He just attacks the weight room. He attacks the workouts. Like, this is a young man that's taking his craft very seriously. He's stronger than he was over the summer when he saw him at Irish Invasion. But he's a guy that has really continues to make his presence felt because he's a little bit more explosive than maybe they thought he'd be at this stage of his career. But this is a kid that just knows how to get open. That's one thing that I talked about on film. This kid knows how to screw you into the ground as a route runner. And that's really helped him so far. He's made a lot of plays, according to different people that I've talked to. And he's that one guy that forces you to talk about him if you're someone on the team. I mean, I'm talking to, not even asking about the wide receivers, and I'll have people bring up Elijah Burrus. So he's a very intriguing player because I wasn't expecting us to be talking a lot about him this early. But that's what you want to be, Trev. That's what you're hoping the other guys can do too, right? It's like your play forces me to have to talk about you. Your play forces me to say, hey, we got to figure out a way to get this kid on the field. Now, again, long way to go for Elijah, just like the other guys. But that's you're talking about your first 6, 7, 8 practices of your career, and you're already kind of letting people know, like, hey, I'm here. Don't forget about me. That's a good sign too, because even though he's similar to those other guys, I actually think he's a little bit different. Because I think he's that guy that brings that route running precision to the table that Notre Dame doesn't really have a ton of outside of maybe Greathouse. Faison has the athleticism to be a great route runner, but he's still learning the position. This is a kid that played quarterback he didn't play receiver in high school the way he does now. He's still learning the position in a lot of ways. But Elijah's that kid, like, it's 3rd and 7. Need you to win. Need you to separate, get open on this particular play. He's got a lot of that to his game. Which is funny because he's complete opposite of his dad. His dad in high school was 6'6" and just kind of ran by you. I mean, that's what his dad was. You know what I mean? He was just, Elijah's a completely different type of player than his dad, which is really interesting. But he has really come on strong.
In the limited practice time that we have been able to see, he is definitely by far the most refined receiver that came in the class of 2025. That's for sure. And look, we didn't see one-on-ones. We didn't see like a true 7-on-7. I think the most we saw was like the RVA stuff that they do. But there is a difference in the understanding of the game right now at the levels that he's at versus Scrap Richardson and Jerome Bettis Jr. That is one thing that I did notice, because with those two guys, it is still a lot of thinking. And for a kid like Elijah Burrus, it comes a little bit more naturally. Still, again, ways to go for him. Common theme that it's been for the other guys as well. But Elijah Burrus is somebody that has stuck out to me a little bit as well. I'm glad to hear that the sources that you have are also kind of confirming a lot of the things that we believe to be true as well. So excited to see what he can continue to do. Maybe somebody to look out for in the spring game. He's going to be somebody that I'm going to have my eye on this Saturday when we're up there, because we're going to get a full slate of everything. So some of the questions that we do have about what do you look like in one-on-ones? What do you look like in the team setting? What do you look like blocking? Because I know that's a big facet of what Mike Denbrock in the offense will kind of dictate from their wide receivers as well. And so all that's going to be interesting to watch. But I'm excited to see Elijah Burrus continue to grow in South Bend. That's for sure.
So, Trev, that's going to do it for our receiver conversation. We're going to, again, the next couple weeks is going to be very telling to see who can finish the spring strong. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing these guys on Saturday and see, does our conversation change at all, positively or negatively, coming out of that practice. And then, of course, we'll have the blue gold game, which, we've never been able to tell a lot from spring games. We've always tried to. I think this one will be even less impactful as far as what we can learn about this football team. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But before we move over to the linebacker conversation, do us a favor, folks. You see that little thumbs up below. Go ahead and hit that like button for us. We would greatly appreciate that. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And, of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right, Brian, we're getting ready to jump into the linebacker conversation. And again, another group that has been highly talked about, similar to the wide receiver room, but again, for different reasons. We spent a lot of time the last couple of days talking about this linebacking room. And you and I are both under the assumption that we believe that this can be one of the best in the country. Brian, you talked about when you were on vacation, you hopped in the show with us for a little bit with me and Sean Davis, that you believe that this linebacking room could finish as the top unit in the country for really good reason. And you go and you look at the makeup of this room. Max Bulla has a spoil of riches to work with. He has a lot of guys with a lot of experience coming back. I mean, between Drake Bowen and Kingston and Jaylen Sneed and Jaden Osberry, they have over 1,800 snaps returning from last season, which is really, really promising. I think it's either 1,829 or 1,830. And so you go and you talk about that experience, but one of the questions that we do have about this group is the linebacker who played the most amount of snaps for you last season and played in the most amount of games for Notre Dame in school history, Jack Kaiser, is now on his way to the NFL draft. Who steps in at will? For all of the conversations that we've had about this football program in the spring and all the different position battles and who's going to step in at safety and who's going to step up on the edge and who's going to be wide receiver this and how is the tight end room going to do? Who's the quarterback going to be? Linebacker has kind of fallen to the wayside. And you and I were talking before the show, and this is a position that it can matter. And I know we've kind of painted this picture of 10,000-foot view. Doesn't matter who you put in there. And there is still some truth to that because we saw that last year with the amount of experience that they generated from last season. But, Brian, going into the spring, it is going to be a question of who lines up next to Drake Bowen, because out of all the guys in the room, I can confidently say, you can confidently say that he's kind of the guy at middle linebacker. But then who lines up next to him at will? What does that rotation look like? The addition of Madden Faramo makes this a little bit more interesting. But the three guys that we really want to focus on, Brian, is Jaylen Sneed, Jaden Osberry, and Kingston Assa.
Kind of thinking through this conversation, Trevor, and why my take on it has changed a little bit as far as like, I don't really care who plays, and I still kind of feel that way. To, maybe let's dive into this a little bit, is because, well, there's several different factors to it. And one is, I think, first of all, part of my optimism for why I think this linebacker room is going to be so good is obviously because it's a very talented room. But the second reason why is because whoever plays is, and this is kind of where I didn't really care as much about the who, because whoever plays, that guy will have had to outplay some really talented players, and that competition is going to raise everybody's level. Because we're sitting there saying, like, well, yeah, of course Drake Bowen is going to start at middle linebacker, but that's only because of the talent, the experience, and the work that he's putting in. If Drake Bowen went into this offseason like, I've arrived, I'm the man, I'm going to be the Mike, he's just hanging out eating Cheetos and going out and partying and not doing what he needs to do, he's going to get passed up real quick. The reason that we're kind of like he's locked in is because he's not doing those things. He is putting in the work, and everything we hear is that he's just going to keep building on what he's done. Now, the counter to that, so what excites you about the rest of it is we are hearing how well everybody's performing. And so whoever plays first and second and third or whatever, you're going to have had to force your way onto the field. And I think that the Madden Faramo edition also is something, Bodie Cahoon going into year 2, those things all factor into where you got to put in the work, because you can't just assume I was here last year, so I'm going to play here this year. But I also think that there's some interesting sort of variations in the strengths and weaknesses that make me say, okay, do they alter how they attack teams if one guy steps up as significantly better than the others? Do they alter who they play more depending on who they're playing? And I think so. I think that there's going to be a little bit more of a variation of how they play based on who plays. Let's just say hypothetically that Jaylen Sneed and Jaden Osberry are ahead of Kingston. They just pull ahead of Kingston this spring. And Kingston's kind of the number 2 to Drake now. And he's, spelling Drake, and he's not playing a lot of will, let's just say. Well, how you're going to attack from the will linebacker position is going to be a little bit different because they're different players than Kingston. On the flip side, if Kingston goes out this spring and he's the guy that pulls away and says, hey, I know I'm also playing Mike linebacker, but I'm also your best will linebacker. How you use him and Drake Bowen together is going to be a little different than how you use Drake Bowen and Jaden Osberry together, or especially Jaylen Sneed, because I think Jaylen has the most unique skill set of the group. And so that's why I think it does kind of maybe matter a little bit more than initially I had thought about who kind of steps up and becomes that top guy. So that's something that I think maybe has altered my thinking on this a little bit, Trev, of why it's maybe a little bit more important than initially we had talked to.
I think it's interesting when you break down who is involved in this conversation. And for me, I kind of like to work back to front. And similar to the quarterback competition, I always start with the veteran in the room first. And Jaylen Sneed is kind of the first name that comes to mind here. And he's one of the more interesting cases when it comes to this competition because he does have a little bit more of that niche skill set in comparison to what Kingston and Jaden Osberry bring to the table. Fact of the matter is, Jaylen Sneed returns as the oldest guy in the room. Technically, he played 433 snaps last season. He has 703 snaps on his career. He's put on weight. That was one thing that you and I talked about before the show is you're starting to see some of these players physically and mentally gear up for what their roles could be this season. And we started to see it at the end of the season where Jaylen Sneed went from being just, hey, you're going to be our third down, like NASCAR package type of speed edge rusher to, hey, we need you to be a 3-down linebacker because we have 2 guys in Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser who've combined for over 1,200 snaps up to this point. And so we're going to need you to take on more of that role. And Jaylen Sneed started against Georgia, Penn State, and Ohio State. And early on against Georgia, especially on that first drive, he was all over the field making plays in the backfield. It reflected. He ended the season with 6 tackles for a loss, 2.5 sacks. He tallied 16 total pressures on the season, including 5 hits on the quarterback. So he still had that edge rush, pass rushing skill set, but now he started to form more into that every down linebacker. And so will that translate over to playing will? What's that going to look like? How are they going to use him on third down situations? Because athletically, he's a very gifted player. Some of the knocks on him before are, hey, man, you need to learn how to be just a better football player, an every down linebacker. And so for me, that transition with Jaylen Sneed is going to be interesting, especially when he's in competition with guys like Kingston and Jaden Osberry, who being that will type of linebacker comes a little bit more naturally. So his transition throughout the spring is going to be one to watch. So that's where I'm at with a guy like Jaylen Sneed.
Jaylen Sneed's the interesting player, Trev, because he's another one of those guys that he's sort of entering that do or die moment in his career where how you perform this spring and in fall camp is going to determine whether you finish your career as a very important niche rotation player or can you finally emerge as the guy at a position. And I don't know that he will or won't. I think that, because there's been some positive comments about him, he kind of becomes the hot story. And this is kind of how it works in the media is one guy starts getting talked about and everybody feels the need. They got to talk about that guy because I don't want to be the people that are missing out on that guy, blah, blah. And that's just kind of how it goes every spring and every fall camp. You just all of a sudden one guy, everybody writes a story about this one guy because the coach talked good things about him in practice. But at the same time, you also can't look at Jaylen Sneed's 10 pounds of extra weight and think it's anything other than that dude is putting in work mean, you saw him, Trev. That's not bad weight. And he looks, I mean, you can tell he's noticeably thicker, and it's not here. Like when I get thicker, it's all right here. I mean, that's just kind of where it all goes. With Jaylen, I mean, you could see it here. You can see it here. And it's like, and then you watch him go through drills. There's just a different, and I know you can't speak to this, Trev, because this is the first time you've seen him in practice. But like the thing that makes me say, okay, I'm paying a little bit more attention to Jaylen Sneed now than I did before spring started is because he's going about his business differently. Like the thing that would frustrate me with Jaylen Sneed so much in the past is just he just was always a really athletic kid that just never seemed to pay the attention to the detail that all the other guys did. Just going through drills, he'd always have to get corrected. He'd be a guy a lot of times who's messing up a drill. He's not going through a drill with the same type of energy that other guys are. It's just kind of like he's going through the motions, and it would just kind of frustrate you because as a coach, you look for that. That's what was different about watching him in the first two practices because you're like, dude, Jaylen Sneed's going about this like you expect a starting linebacker to go about his business. Not just a really athletic, highly ranked guy, but a guy that put all that mess aside. I got an opportunity. I'm running out of chances. What are you going to do with it? And that's a theme of a lot of this show, Travis. You all have opportunities. What are you going to do with it? And they're all different opportunities. And that's what has me excited. Like, okay, so far from what we've seen, and again, it's two practices, and I'm very curious to see what we're going to see on Saturday, but it's a very different focus and intensity, noticeable focus and intensity from Jaylen Sneed compared to what I've seen from him in the past. And that's very important to me because that's what always held Jaylen Sneed back. And I'll be honest, there was a little bit of a sense of entitlement with Jaylen when he first got here. I am a top, 100 player. It's like I've told the story about, you've heard me tell the story, Trev, but I kept, how he raced, I think it was J.D. Bertrand and I think it was Marist, and how he got beat. Well, the reason they raced him is not because they felt something they had to prove. He just kept running his mouth and talking about how good he was and how fast he was and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, okay, it's time to put this guy in his place. And so I think there was just a lot of that entitlement and just how things should be given to me, and from being honest now, not being honest, being a little bit more forthcoming now or open now than maybe we were at the time. One of the reasons he stopped playing as much in 2023 is because he started losing reps because he was not executing. He was not doing what he needed to do. He got mad, got in his feelings a little bit, and that made his productivity even less. So he didn't play again until later in the year when some guys were down. And what we saw last year, Trevor, when it started to click for him, is because you started to see a guy that's a little bit more focused on doing things the right way. But even still, we saw in the Georgia game, where we saw it a little bit in the Penn State game, where there's still some fit issues with him. And he still has to learn that part. But the biggest thing for Jaylen was, do you want to be great based on your work, or do you want to be great because in what you've earned, or do you think you're entitled to be great by what people are going to give you? And the difference in what we've seen from Jaylen Sneed over the last 7-8 months now in the spring is this looks like a kid who looks like the other linebackers now in a good way. It's like he's starting to look like a guy that wants to earn the chance to go out and be a star. And that's huge because the talent has never been a question with Jaylen Sneed, ever. And you talked about the Georgia game. I mean, like, I still laugh when I think of some of the conversations I had with people last year where there's still people that act like Notre Dame doesn't have speed at linebacker. I'm like, yeah, Georgia's running backs thought that early in the game too. And then they kept getting hawked to the sideline. And you're just like, yeah, those guys can say what you want about the linebackers. They got to fit better. They did this, didn't do this, they didn't do that, whatever. That's all fine. But the one thing they can do, they can run. And when Jaylen Sneed is playing with energy and he knows what to do, it really pops because he's so explosive. He has a lot of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in him where I don't know if Jaylen's is going to run a 4.4. He's fast. He's probably a 4.5 guy, but it's, 4.6 guy. but at worst, because keep in mind when he raced those guys, he was a freshman and they were juniors and seniors. But anyway, he's got speed, but what made him unique is he had that initial burst that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had, where within 2 steps he's gone. But he didn't always know where to go. Now we're seeing a different version of Jaylen Sneed, and I think that's why he's popping. And you start to say, like, you put a guy like that as more than just a rotational guy, a guy that can come in and be on third down, but a guy that can also make plays on first and second down. You start to say, like, okay, now you're getting a very different player than the Jaylen Sneed we've seen in the past. Talent was never a question. Effectiveness, and that's why they've used him so much on third down, because it was just like, dude, you got one job. Rush the quarterback through the C gap. Rush the quarterback through the B gap. There's no thinking involved. Just go. It was the stuff where he had to read and react and make good decisions where he'd get in trouble. And even in the playoff, he'd make great plays, and then he'd have a bad fit that opens up a cutback lane. So now if he can prove to be a more consistent player and a more focused player, and we're seeing the focus in the drills, what we can't tell is he more disciplined in his assignments, because we haven't had a chance to see that one way or the other. But if he answers that question positively, then I do think the hype about him from the spring will be proven to be worth it, because there's never been a doubt about his talent, Trevor. And he could add a very different element to the – I mean, if you're replacing Jack Kaiser with a locked-in, focused, disciplined version of Jaylen Sneed, bro, that's going to be an impressive football player.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like starting the conversation off with a guy like Jaylen Sneed, because he is the oldest guy in the room. And if he comes into his own this season, you have 2 really talented players behind him that are not done playing football in South Bend. And that just bodes well for the entire room. It really does. The next guy on this list that's kind of in the mix of this conversation is Jaden Osberry, who, you want to talk about speed. He's a kid for me that, honestly, last year I didn't know that he could run like that. I'm not saying that Jaden Osberry is going to go run a 4.4, but he's not somebody that I thought could move the way that he could. And that was really exciting for me to see last year. You know, Jaden Osberry, we're talking about somebody who the year before he played 21 snaps. And in 2024, he stepped up in a big way. He played 438 snaps last season. He finished number 5 on the team in total tackles, and he only started 1 game, and it was against Army. You know, he finished the year with 56 tackles, 6.5 tackles for a loss. He's a really strong open field tackler. And
his 6.5 tackles for loss were, I believe, tied for second on the team last year with Josh Burnham. And so that adds a little something to that conversation as well. Wasn't just that he finished 5th on the team in tackles. I mean, I think but he finished 2nd on tackles for loss. The reason that matters is because that tells you, on a per snap basis, he was getting in the backfield. I mean, or not to get the back. He was making a lot of plays on the ball for a guy that didn't play a ton. He was getting to the ball a lot. And I think that was something that started to flash. But you also at times last year, Trev, saw a guy that still has a lot to learn. But like here's another thing that I'll point to. So if you look at Pro Football Focus has this stat they call stops. And I'll read to you what it is. It's a defensive stop, a tackle that constitutes a failure for the offense. It's pretty big deal. So last year, Jack Kaiser led the defense with 35. Drake Bowen was next with 30. Jaden Osberry was next with 26. Here's the difference. Adon Schuler was next with 23. Xavier Watts was tied with him with 23. Riley Mills had 21. Leonard Moore had 20. Those are all the guys that had 20 or more. Jaylen Osberry played 438 snaps. The rest of the guys in that group played 641, 615, 768, 970, 539. Riley Mills, 736, and Leonard Moore. So he was 4 stops behind Drake Bowen, 9 stops behind Jack Kaiser, but he played 177 fewer snaps than Drake Bowen, and he played 203 fewer snaps than Jack Kaiser. So if for example, you take his numbers, I love doing this, Trev. You take his numbers and you say, okay, well, what would it be if he had the same production rate on the same snaps as Jack Kaiser? He'd had 3 more tackles for loss than Jack Kaiser did last season. And, you start looking at that and you're saying, okay, this is a guy that on a per snap basis was a very effective player. And so he'd have had 7 more tackles stops than Drake Bowen. Now, part of that's how he was used. The Mike linebacker wasn't used as much to be sort of that on-ball playmaker. That's why you saw, J.D. Bertrand wasn't a guy that racked up a ton of tackles for loss last couple of years either. He had 7.5 the year before. He had 8.5 the year before that. 7 the year before that. So he wasn't a guy that had a ton of tackle for loss production either, even though he played a ton of snaps, because they didn't ask their Mike linebacker to be that type of player. So that doesn't mean that Drake can't maximize more playmaking opportunities. He absolutely can. But if they play the same way and he's better, he's not going to go out and have 12 tackles for loss. He'll have 8. So when you look at a guy like Jaden Osberry and you look at that per snap production, Trev, it starts to kind of sink in like, okay, this guy's a playmaker. And you saw some issues with him in the postseason where I think against the better competition, the lack of experience kind of got him in positions where he got beat, taking a bad angle against Penn State, not going low with as not much force against Quinshon Judkins in the playoffs. I think those experiences are going to be great for Jaden Osberry because he's so talented and he's so gifted. I think he was sometimes able to make plays just because he's so smart and athletic. I think of the play he made backside against Georgia Tech when it's 21-7 and they score there. It's third quarter. It's 21-14. We got a ball game and they run a reverse. I think it was to Singleton. And Jaden read it perfectly and just brings him down in space. I'm like, dude, not a lot of people could bring that kid down in space. Might have been Rutherford, but both of them are that way. And then they end up forcing a punt or a field goal that Georgia Tech then misses. That was a huge play. Georgia Tech was trying to score on that play. He's got so much of that ability, but there's still a lot of work to be done from a technical standpoint. And I know from the things that Max Bulla has said, that's a big part of it. And getting Jaden to understand, like, dude, you didn't have your struggles because you weren't big enough. You still got to learn to position at a higher level. And that's what I think this spring is about with him. Because I think Jaden Osberry, between him and Jaylen Sneed, is the more natural football player. He's the more instinctive football player. He's a pretty athletic kid. I don't know if he's quite as twitchy as Jaylen Sneed, but he's a guy that can kind of do a little bit of everything. He can cover, he can hit, he can run, he can play the run, he can rush the passer. It's just about being a more consistent football player from a technical standpoint. I think that's a big thing for Jaden to work on this offseason, Trev. You were at the press conference. Am I relaying appropriately kind of the things that Max Bulla said? You talk about what Max Bulla said about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said at the start of this segment, you see linebackers kind of gearing up for this position battle at will. And you see guys like Jaylen Sneed, who went from 224 to 235 in an off season, and he's gearing up and he's putting in the work. And I think you have a guy like Jaden Osberry, who he voiced that he wanted to put on a little bit more weight. Not anything crazy. I think he wanted to go from like 220 to 225, maybe a hair above. And what Max Bulla's comments were is like, hey, listen, this isn't about weight for you. You play fine at this weight, but there's different fits. It's like, I don't want to sacrifice your playmaking ability, your ability to cover sideline to sideline by putting on 5 pounds of potentially what could be bad weight. That's not, all in all, Max Bulla essentially said, that's not what I view as your improvement. Whereas Jaylen Sneed, he was very open about, look, when he was playing at 224, the things that we were asking him to do, there's times that he would go down and get in the mix and kind of get bounced out a little bit because he wasn't big enough. They're different body types. Jaylen Sneed and Jaden Osberry are built different. Not all 225-pound linebackers are built the same. People carry their weight differently, and Jaylen Sneed was a lighter 225 type of guy. That's why he had to put on more weight. That's not an issue with Jaden Osberry. And so if he's able to hone in some of those things that were lapses like that we saw from time to time against Penn State, and from time to time against Ohio State. And if that level of performance can be more consistently what he was against Georgia Tech and what he did against Stanford and what he did against, moments against USC, like that's the level that he needs to get to. That's the opportunity in front of him this spring, which again, all encompassing is what makes this such an intriguing position battle. Because if it were, let's say the Jaylen Sneed of 6 months ago, I think we're kind of having a two-man conversation of, hey, what does this look like between Jaden Osberry and Kingston? If Kingston can make that jump from freshman to sophomore year, Jaylen Sneed's going to kind of be that third down guy who's going to continue to rush the passer, and he's going to have his job on defense. Now that makes this a little bit more interesting. But with a guy like Jaden Osberry, if he gets better with his run fits, and it's going to bode really, really well, because that was his area of focus. Jaden Osberry said, I want to play better in the run game. I need to put on more weight. And Maxwell's counter to that was, your issues in the run game aren't about your weight. It's about fit. It's about timing. And so that to him is what's going to be the biggest difference maker, is
right.
Just honing in your skills as a football player.
Right. And that's where some of those moments in the playoffs can kind of get in your head a little bit as a player. Why did you have that play where you got beat? Why did you have that play where you got stiff-armed? It wasn't because you weren't 235. It's because you didn't take the proper angle to the football. Your approach to the running back wasn't what it needed to be, that type of thing. And he'll have to learn that. Final guy that we're going to discuss today, Trev, is going to be Kingston Assa. Now, he's a bit of a unique player because Kingston is going to play two positions this year in the base defense. He's not only going to battle for time at will, if not the starting job at will, but he's also the next guy in line when Drake Bowen's not on the field at Mike. And so he's going to have a bit of a different role. We've also seen Kingston as a pass rusher. We don't like that's the interesting too, is I don't know how that part of the defense is going to look under Chris Ash. Do they continue to do that the same way? Is it Jaylen and Kingston are going to be on the field more? That's an interesting dynamic and I'm not sure that I know we don't have an answer to that because we haven't seen them do any of that in practice so far. But Kingston's an interesting player too, Trev, because he's the opposite of the other two guys. He has slimmed down, from being 240 this fall to now, being a little lighter, cut his hair. Not that has anything to do with how he plays, but it's just like he's just a different looking guy now. He's going the opposite direction because he's trying to get a little bit quicker and a little bit more explosive. And it's kind of interesting to watching those two guys go about it. But this is an important spring for Kingston as well, because you do have those other two guys putting in the work the way they are. Kingston's got to match that. And so far, from everything that we're hearing, he absolutely has done that. And I actually think part of the reason that those other two linebackers are so locked in on top of wanting to play and make an impact is they know that 27 is not going anywhere. And that's raised everyone's level. But I think Kingston Assa coming to Notre Dame, this is a very underappreciated part of his presence. Him coming to Notre Dame has raised the bar for everyone. Drake Bowen knows if I don't bring it every day, they're going to have no problem going to 27. If you're a will linebacker, if I don't bring it every day, they're going to have no problem going to 27. We saw 34 and 27 side by side last year plenty of times. That's Drake and Kingston. And they will have no problem going with those two guys or at the same time or starting lineup. So that's the thing about Kingston is I almost am like, dude, we know what he is. We know what his talent level is. We can't dismiss just how important he was for this Notre Dame football team. Not only landing him, not only gave you another talented player, but I think it forced everyone in the room to say the minute he showed up and the minute – because here's what none of those players give two rips about Kingston's recruiting rankings. That's not what I'm talking about. They don't care. They were all ranked high too. Jaylen Sneed is the highest ranked guy in the room. Jaden Osberry was a top 100 recruit. Drake Bowen was a top 100 recruit. It was more about when they got out there and put the pads on, and they're like, this 27 can play. That's what it was. It's like, okay, if I want to start this year, I better bring it. And that's what his presence has really done done wonders, is because it's one more key player that can play everywhere that forces everybody else to raise their level of play. And the fact that Kingston's coming out in year 2 hungry to prove even more continues to have that impact on the rest of the room, because he can play anywhere. he can threaten anybody at linebacker for their job. Whereas Jaylen Sneed's battling at will and is a rusher. Jaden Osberry could play Mike in the pinch, but he's a will, a rover, Kingston can do it all. And that's what makes him a great addition to the defense as far as what he can do, but just his presence and the way he goes about his business, the way he puts in the work and the talent he has forces. I mean, Jaylen Sneed and Jaden Osberry is like, you better put in the work, because if you don't, you're going to get passed up. I don't think that's the driving force. I think that's part of it. I think the main reason those two guys are working is because they want to go play and they want to go be the best they can be and they want to do all this. But the presence of 27, I can tell you with certainty, is something that they're all very well aware of, that if you don't bring it, this kid is going to. Kingston will bring it, and he's talented. So it just raises everybody's level of play.
I think that's a great point. I mean, Kingston is kind of the unicorn in the room because he can do everything. I mean, even if again, you touched on it, I don't know if Chris Ash is going to ask guys like Kingston and Jaylen Sneed to be rushing off the edge as much as they did in previous years under Al Golden. But Jaylen Sneed can't even afford to take his foot off the gas in that aspect, because Kingston was a very proven pass rusher last season, and he got after the quarterback. I think he pressured and got a sack against Drew Aller in the postseason, and that was only his second game back after injury. And so it forces everybody to step up their level of game. But I love Kingston, man. I mean, he's arguably the biggest guy in the room after losing weight. You know, I mean,
he's losing weight and still, except for Drake. Drake's the only guy that matches him size-wise. But as far as like the wills, he's the biggest guy in the room, despite losing like 8 pounds this offseason. Like half that had to be hair. I mean, like if we're being honest about that, you know what I mean? Like, let's be real. He didn't lose like 8 pounds of body weight. He probably lost like 2-3 pounds of hair, and then 4 or 5 pounds of body weight. That's got him down to 232.
Has to be, man. Has to be. But in the little bit that we did see from him, I did mention that he does look a step quicker. I said that he was playing with a little bit more pop, and you and I were sitting on the bench outside of the stadium when we were talking about him. It's like some of that I think is just he's a step quicker. Not necessarily he just got that much stronger. It's one, playing with a little bit more clarity. He's going into year 2. He has a better understanding of the position now. But he's a little lighter. He's a step quicker, which I think is causing a little bit more of the pop. I mean, Kingston, he was rushing the passer last year. He's also the only linebacker that ended the season with an interception. And so, like, that just kind of tells you the broad skill set that he has, which is crazy. Absolutely
that is
crazy.
So weird to me that Notre Dame has gotten so little. This is completely off topic, but you said that he had a pick last year. And what game was that?
Purdue.
It's Purdue game. Okay. That was off a tipped ball, correct?
Yep.
It is wild to me how little they had one interception in 2023 from the linebacker room. That was Jack Kaiser against Stanford, who stinks. They had one interception from linebacker in 2022. That was Maris Leofow against Syracuse. I believe that was also off of a tip ball. And 2021, Kaiser had 2. Bo Bauer had 1. Drew White had 1. You had 4 in 2021. You had 3 in 2020. Jack Kaiser had 1. Bo had 1. Jeremiah Usukora had 1. You didn't have any in 2019. That was, we'll talk about that linebacker room. But like, you just look at it, it's just like there's been different times where the linebacker position was a very turnover heavy unit. Think of Manti, 7 picks in 2012. And in the last 3 years, they've had 3 picks by linebackers total. I think 2 of the 3, if not all 3, were off tip balls. I just think that's kind of weird. And you wonder, like, that's going to change at some point in time. But then you start to think about it, you're like, okay, that makes a little sense, though, when you consider how much Al Golden blitzed the linebackers or triggered them when a running back stayed in to protect, which I never understand why teams do that as much as they do. I get why teams do it at times, but I never understood why you're just going to have the linebacker just kind of step to the line with a sort of a late quote-unquote blitz simply because the running back didn't trigger. And sometimes with like mobile quarterbacks, that makes sense because you want to eat up the gaps and not give them a running lane. But like, why not drop that guy into coverage a little bit more? It's just different conversation for a different day. But I am curious to see, and this is an unknown, there are going to be some changes to how they cover this year, schematically. Won't get into specifics, but there's going to be some differences. Does that change things for the linebackers? How they blitz, I think, is going to be different. How they drop into coverage is going to be different. Does that create some more opportunities for them to make some more plays in the football? Not just with interceptions, but also things like passes defensed, in-space forced fumbles, things along those lines. That's also something that I'm very curious to see kind of how that changes, because if you look at the linebacker room last year, Trev, not only did they only have one interception, they only had 5 pass breakups all year. That's it. Bo Bauer had 5 by himself in 2021. So, J.D. Bertrand had 3 in 2022, but like the last couple years, J.D. Bertrand had 5 of them the year before. We didn't see a lot of pass game production from the linebackers last year. And sack numbers were okay, but they weren't anything special. So it wasn't like they were making up for it. That's going to be a big thing for this linebacker room. When we talk about this unit taking that next step to become the best linebacker room in college football, because I don't argue that they were in 2024. I'm projecting that they will be in 2025. That's an area where they're going to have to get better. They're going to have to be more productive against the pass. When you blitz, you need to get home more. When you're in coverage, you need to make more plays. That's going to be a very important piece to this puzzle, to this linebacker room taking that next step. I mean, there's things like consistency and all that type of stuff from an execution standpoint are key. And I want to respond to something. Somebody said, so Ash's comments about just running the existing Notre Dame defense just lip service. You're taking that comment and running with it in a direction that I'm not going. Changing how you cover, meaning we may play man this percentage compared to last year's percentage, is not inventing a new defense. We've always said Chris Ash is going to have to call the defense the way that he's comfortable. If I blitz 25% of the time compared to 50% of the time, doesn't mean I've brought in a new defense. It means I'm changing the emphasis of what we're doing. It's still the same defense. And he also said we're going to have some tweaks and changes. He said that as well. He's just not coming in with a brand new playbook saying, here's the Chris Ash playbook. So this was never he's going to blitz the same amount as Al Golden. He's going to play as much man as Al Golden did. That was never going to be the thing. It was structurally, this is going to look very similar to what it looked like under Al Golden in regard to the terminology, how they line up and certain things that they do. The principles of what make a great defense are going to remain the same. How you get there will look a little bit different. But also how you get there is going to be impacted by what this linebacker room does this spring. And here's what I mean by that. And this is where I think that who starts or who becomes the prominent guy has a little bit more impact, Trev. Because if Kingston Viliama Assa is your primary number 2 guy next to Drake Bowen, he's got a skill set that's a little different than Jaden Osberry and Jaylen Sneed. If one of those guys is the number 2, they have a different skill set. I'm going to trust Jaden Osberry and Kingston in coverage a lot more than I'm going to trust Jaylen Sneed when it comes to getting depth, looking up in routes, curls. If Jalen's going to be in coverage, it's going to be, you take that running back on a wheel. That he can do. But with him, his skill set is when he is a full-time linebacker, it's like, dude, you can trigger, you can rush the quarterback, you can chase down underneath stuff. And he's the guy you may want handling more crossers and stuff like that because he brings a little bit more speed to the table. Jaden Osberry, Drake Bowen, Kingston, those are guys that I feel a lot more comfortable like getting depth in zone coverage, looking up in cuts, looking up curls, those type of things, getting into the seam areas, things like that. Jaden Osberry can also do some of the things that Jaylen Sneed can do in regard to pursuit, chasing, covering crossers, covering overs, covering running backs on different route combinations. Has some potential as a pass rusher. And what's interesting about the linebackers last year is, we didn't see the same volume of pressures and blitzes as we saw last season, but the success rate was pretty good, meaning when they did rush, they hit home pretty effectively, which I'll have some numbers for that here in a bit. But how you feel about them doing the different aspects is going to impact how you build your defense. Because you may say, hey, I love to blitz linebackers a lot, but these guys aren't good blitzers. Or I'm not a big blitzing linebacker guy, but these guys are great blitzers. So that impacts how you do it. I love dropping linebackers into zone coverage. I got a bunch of guys that aren't instinctive in pass game. Then guess what? You don't want to put them a lot in that situation. Those are all hypotheticals that you need to kind of look into, and that's going to impact a lot of what he does. The other thing that I think is unique about this, Trev, is there's a little bit more variation in skill set than we've seen in the past, where, you like JD and Jack and Marist all were kind of undersized, Marist skinnier, those other guys shorter and skinnier, fast, athletic guys. You have a chance to be a little bit thicker. So when you look at the schedule and you think about, some of the teams that they're going to play, there's going to be some games where you may not see a whole lot of Drake and Kingston playing next to each other. There may be other games where you see a whole lot of Drake and Kingston playing next to each other. And that's something that I think could be true this year as well, is we may not see the same rotation week to week. Miami, if, with some of the backs they have, like, you may say, hey, look, there may be some down and some personnel groupings where you want to get them on the field together. But other ones you don't. You're going to play a team where you say, hey, look, we're playing USC. I don't know that I want Kingston and Drake on the field a whole lot together. But then you're going and you get Georgia in the postseason. If they're running the offense, they should be like, dude, we're going to want to have Drake and Kingston on the field together a lot. Because especially when like they go 12 personnel, I'm putting them both on the field with Jaden or Jaylen. And so that's something that I think you have even more at your disposal this year than you had last year, especially when you start talking about add Madden Faremo to the mix, who's going to be a 6'2.5", 230-pound kid by the time we get to the fall. You have a lot more ability to get big if you want to without losing athleticism, because none of their big guys struggle to run. And I think that's something that Chris Ash is going to have at his disposal that Al Golden didn't really have the last couple of years. I mean, you had Drake and Kingston this year, but they were a true sophomore and a true freshman. And it was just the two of them. Next year, you'll have the two of them still, but then you add Madden to the mix. Jaylen's got a little bit more size to him now, but you now have more of ability, Trev, to match personnel with your linebackers more than you did in recent seasons. And that's something that adds to what I think this linebacker room is going to be as well.
It's about diversity, man. And now Max Bullock, Chris Ash, they now have a bunch of different linebackers with a bunch of different skill sets that they do have to use at their disposal, which I think is really exciting, because now you start talking about defensive fits, and now you can start building lineups not based on the makeup of your team, but based on the opponent that you're facing week in and week out, which I think is really exciting. You started to see that a little bit towards the end of the year. I think that's some of the reason why Jaylen Sneed was earning starts in the postseason on top of his progression. That's why you had, I think Pro Football Focus listed that both Jaden Osberry and Kingston Assa started against Army, according to them. Now, I don't know how that – I'll have to go back and watch the game, because I know for a fact Drake Bowen also started that game, and I don't think Jack Kaiser didn't not start that game. So numbers could be fudged there. But regardless, I say that to say Notre Dame's linebacking core has so many different skill sets that you can now use them differently. To your point, in comparison to other years, your guys were –
Wait, you're talking about the Army game, Trev?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go look that up now.
Okay. But in comparison to other years, like what you were talking about, you kind of just had J.D. Marist, Jack Kaiser. And that was your group, because you were waiting for guys like Drake Bowen to kind of come into his own a little bit. We talked about what Jaylen Sneed was going through during that point in time. And then you didn't have Jaden Osberry. You didn't have Kingston Assa. You didn't have Madden Faremo. And so I think all of that, the combination of all of those guys, makes this a really interesting conversation. And I'm glad that we covered it today, because there is this notion, and I'm guilty of it, and I've said it throughout this offseason as well, that, just know whoever they roll out there, they're going to be fine at linebacker. I want to talk about who's rotating in at safety. I want to talk about how the young corners are progressing. I want to talk about D tackle. And so there's a lot of different things that new defensive coordinator, Chris Ash, is going to be able to utilize with that group. And I'm definitely excited to see it, man. Definitely excited to see it.
So looking at the first play of the game, you have Drake and Jack playing inside. You had Jaden Osberry playing sort of like a Sam position, and Kingston was actually split out over the tight end. So they actually all four were on the field on that first play of the game. So they went with a 4-4 on that first play of the game against Army.
Wow.
So, yeah, they actually were out there. I was looking at it. I was like, is that Jaden or is that Adon? It's like, no, that's Jaden. So, yeah, they that's what they started the game with against Army. So, interesting. Yeah, and then the next play, it's Kingston, Drake, and Jack inside, and then Jaden's coming off the edge. So it's interesting personnel. But, like they couldn't have done that in past years, Trevor.
Nope.
They didn't have four linebackers that could run well enough, to do that. And so – but that's another part of it too, is like I would get frustrated in past years that Al Golden wouldn't play linebackers more. But he didn't trust them. Last year he did. Last year he trusted Kingston. He trusted Jaden Osberry more than he did younger players in the past. And I think it paid off in a big way. Now, I wonder how much of that wasn't like kind of doing it because you had to, because you were playing a 16-game season. You couldn't not do it, or how much of it was like those guys were just a little further along. That's something that I'm very curious about. Very curious about. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, they just give you so many more options than what you just had in the past, Trev. And I think that's just a great weapon for Max Bulla and Chris Ash. And yeah, I'm going to have a little nugget I've gathered from some sources today about Chris Ash on the board later, which I also think is going to fit well to this linebacker room as well. So yeah, but I love the room, Trev, and we spent very little time talking about Madden Faremo, who in past years we'd have been like, that dude is not only going to play a lot, you better hold on to your, or you may get passed up in the starting lineup. That's still kind of true. That's what I love about this room, man. It's just so much time. We didn't talk about Preston Zenner. We didn't talk about Bodie Cahoon, Teddy Rizak. I mean, there's a lot of talent in that room, man. And then in the fall, you're going to get the two Kias. Kahanu's going to be back from his injury. Josiah's going to show up. You're going to get Anthony Sacca. It is amazing what they've been able to do recruiting that position in recent years. And you know what else, man? Like, huge shout out to all these kids for staying. Because in this day and age of just like everybody just leaves, if you're not doing this, they're all staying and battling. Nothing's guaranteed moving forward, but it would have been very easy for them. It would have been very easy for the running backs, for some of those guys to be like, screw this, I'm out. I'm going to go play somewhere else. They're all competing. And I think that says a lot about the type of character they have in the various rooms. And you want to know like why Notre Dame is as good as they are, because they got a lot of competitors. I was on a show with Joe DeLeon the other day for the Believe Network, and we were talking about the changes that in recruiting at Marcus Freeman. Yes, he's recruiting longer guys and more athletic guys and all that, but Marcus Freeman and his staff put a premium on the type of football character you have. And you want to know why this team was able to maximize its potential last year, is because you had a lot of guys like that on this team. It's been very easy for Jadarian Price to be in his feelings because he's not the number one back. It'd be very easy for Jeremiah Love to be in his feelings. He's not giving more carries. It'd be very easy for Aeneas Williams Keydron Young especially. How many top 100 caliber running backs are going to go to the coaching staff and ask to redshirt, and be as comfortable in that room as they are? How many times are you going to have big time, highly ranked linebackers, which all these kids are, not have somebody jump in the portal, after the season? And then for a guy like Madden Faremo to come to Notre Dame with all that's in front of him, it just says a lot about the type of young men that they're recruiting, that they're willing to say, hey, I'm going to battle. I'm going to compete. Now, there may come a time when leaving is the best thing for some of these young men, and that's life. I transferred after my freshman year. But it's like, why are you leaving? And it's same thing with quarterback. Very easy for at least one of those guys to say, you know what, screw this. I'm going to go somewhere, and I can't afford to miss the spring and all that. You can say that about offensive line. You think Sullivan Absher hasn't thought about, there's a clear path for me playing somewhere else? You don't think that's crossed his mind at some point in time? Of course it has. But he's here competing. And that's what I love. It's one of the things you love about this football team, but it speaks volumes about this coaching staff saying, hey, it's not just about getting athleticism and talent. We got to get the right kind of people here too. We got to get fighters. We got to get guys that are willing to grind. We got to get guys that are competitive. We got guys that aren't going to back down from a fight. We aren't, I'm not talking about a literal fight. I'm talking about, a challenge in life, whether it be football field or your depth chart spot or playing a tough opponent. Adversity is not going to beat this team. And that's why I allowed Notre Dame to overcome the things they overcame last year and still be a really good football team because you have a lot of football character. And I got to give a lot of credit to Ohio State too, because they had to overcome a lot of that stuff too. And I think that's why those two teams were the ones that ultimately rose to the top by the end of the year, because you had the right kind of people on that football team to say, look, I don't care the things that haven't gone our way, or we lost this game, or this guy got injured, or that guy got injured. We're going to go out there and we're going to, I'm accepting my role and I'm going to be the best I can be at it. And in Jaden Osberry, you talked about what he said he needs to get better at. Wouldn't have been the easiest thing for Jaden Osberry is to jump in the portal and then just go find somewhere where there's nobody on his level in the starting lineup?
Oh, yeah.
There's some SEC schools Jaden Osberry could transfer to where he's the best guy in the room the minute he steps foot on campus. But instead, what did he choose? I'm going to stay here. I'm going to work to get better. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's going to make him an even better football player. And that's why these kids are going. That's why there's so much confidence that I have, Trevor, and why this football team as a whole, but also why this linebacker room is going to be so good, is because unlike most of the last 20 years where you're going to be good if that guy steps up, now it's different. If this guy gets hurt or doesn't step up or transfers, you've got this guy. And if he doesn't, then you've got this guy. And that's what makes this so different, is the depth of talent. They are all forcing each other to be the best versions of themselves. And if you don't be, then you're going to get left behind. And we're not that far removed from Notre Dame starting a linebacker who finished a full season where he missed no games with less than 20 tackles. Think about that. You had a starting linebacker at Notre Dame who had less than 20 tackles in a season in which he missed, I think maybe he missed one game. I have to go back and remember that. Let me find out what year that was. I think that was 2020. But that was one of those things where you talk about, man, this missed one game. And I'm talking about 2020, when you had a starting linebacker on your defense who that year, this is just going to make you sad, Trevor, who that year played 297 snaps on defense, most at the will position, and he finished the year with 14 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. And that team made the freaking playoff. Now you look at what the room is now. And yeah, it's come a long way. And it's true everywhere. But linebacker especially, man. Like from the moment Marcus Freeman arrived, it's just been a completely different animal with recruiting that position. And it's not just because of him, but obviously he got it started. And if you think about it, 2 of his top linebacker recruits started at defensive end for them last year during a playoff run. And Junior Tilamaka and Josh Burnham, who were 2 highly ranked linebacker recruits in Marcus Freeman's first class. But that's where my confidence level comes, Trev, because you're not just counting on if this one guy doesn't pan out, you're in trouble. And that's why you like the room a whole lot.
Fair enough.
Let's go ahead and transition into this next portion, Trevor. We're going to talk about the mailbag. But before we do, folks, y'all know what to do. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. If you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We've had some recruiting intel here this last week, a lot of recruiting intel this last week. Have some more coming up. Obviously, there's a lot of recruits on campus coming on campus today. They'll be here till tomorrow. A lot of them will be. We'll have some guys on campus this weekend as well. So bring you the intel as we get it. Sean Davis had some quotes on the board today from a stud 2027 linebacker who recently visited campus. You're going to want to read those. He had some stuff on Jazeel Hart last night, who had a big-time visit to Notre Dame this week. Very huge visit. So he'll have some of that. And, of course, we'll have our recruiting breakdowns and team breakdowns and different things like that on there as well. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Trev, as we do every day, we're going to do a mailbag here today. We've got 15 questions in there so far, so we're going to get to these, and we'll either answer all the questions or we'll go for about an hour, whichever one comes first. And let's start things off with our guy, Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker.
During the Freeman era, what potential decommit or transfer would you have liked to have seen stay the most with Notre Dame, and why?
Boy. I'd still say, I still kind of have to say Keon Keeley. I know it hasn't worked out for him at Alabama, but I really feel like Keon would have benefited greatly from being at Notre Dame. He needed a place like Notre Dame. He's not a self-starter. He's a guy that, his high school coach is an old school, push kids, hold them accountable, doesn't coddle, doesn't baby type of coach. And that's what Keon needed. He doesn't have that, that father figure in his life that was pushing him at home. He needed that from his football coach. He didn't get that at Alabama. And I think that's why he hasn't come close to tapping into his potential. He needed that type of push. He would have got that at Notre Dame. So he's one that I think about. Obviously, Peyton Bowen is another guy that I think would have benefited greatly from playing at Notre Dame. Was very good as a freshman, but obviously took a big step back for Oklahoma this past season. He's a guy that I think could have benefited from being at Notre Dame. Certainly could have benefited from being at Notre Dame. Devin Moore is a guy that was a talented cornerback that went to Florida that I think could have provided a lot of depth. He's had some injury issues, but when he's been healthy, he's a guy that's been a pretty good football player for them. If you remember correctly, he was committed to Notre Dame. He was committed to playing for Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator, and then obviously didn't stay around, left, and things didn't quite work out for him in Notre Dame. But he went to Florida and played a decent amount. He's had trouble being injured, but in 2023 he was Florida's highest graded defensive player. But again, he's a guy that missed chunks of the season with injuries. This past season he was a pretty good player again. Last 2 years in 15, he's played 15 games. He's played, the 278 snaps last year. So he's played over 400 snaps last 2 years. He's held opponents to a sub 45% completion rate. These last 2 years, he's had 5 breakups, 3 interceptions. He's allowed 3 touchdowns. He's been a pretty good player for them. I think he'd have fit. He's 6'2". He'd have fit Mike Mickens' system really well. He's a guy that could have helped them a bunch. Maybe moved to safety and played for them there, but he's another one that I think of. I'm just trying to think of some of the other guys that decommitted or transferred that I think would have kind of had the biggest impact. Those are the guys off the top of my head. I don't know that any of the transfers are guys that you look back and you're like, Brandon Hillman decommitted because he had to. Notre Dame wouldn't take him. The admissions wouldn't take him. He could have helped this football team, especially going into this year where he'd be competing for the safety role. He's another guy. But, I think those off the top of my head, those are the ones that stick out the most to me of guys that could have really, like some of the other guys, like Jay Lamar, he'd be buried on the depth chart for this team. He wouldn't have had much of an impact. Cedric Irvin, you understand that one. Owen Wayful, maybe he could be going in to help compete this year, maybe. But, up to now, he would have just been a guy that's, evolving and things like that. So those are some of the guys that off the top of my head that pop into my head. So good
Fair
question,
enough.
man.
Yeah. Aiden Benami, I thought Notre Dame had a chance at Simeon Codwell. Guess not. Think he committed to Ohio due to Blaine B committing, and Womack could have been next.
I don't know where Braylon Womack's going to commit. I stopped paying attention to his recruitment when Notre Dame basically dropped him he wasn't a guy that was going to be able to get through the admissions process. Buddy, just because a guy picks another school doesn't mean that Notre Dame didn't have a chance. They had a chance, and Ohio State just got him. That doesn't mean they didn't have a chance. They had a chance. Other schools had a chance, and he picked Ohio State. Just like when Notre Dame lands a kid, it doesn't mean that they're the only school that had a chance. Other schools had a chance. Notre Dame did a better job of recruiting him than other schools did. So they did have a chance. Just Ohio State won the day. You know, look, you're beating Georgia for some kids. You haven't beaten Georgia in the past. Why? Because you beat Georgia. Ohio State's beating you for players. Why? They've beat you 3 years in a row and just won the national championship. Doesn't mean that Notre Dame didn't have a chance. The kid visited on his own dime, liked Notre Dame, talked good about Notre Dame. Ohio State just did a better job closing on them. Yeah. Simple as that. Yeah. You know, so like Blaine Bradford, they had their shot early and then just wasn't interested in what Notre Dame was selling. So he went somewhere else. But yeah, it's not one of those things where if a guy doesn't pick your school, you didn't have a chance with him. Sometimes other schools just do a better job recruiting a guy, or the fit's better, or whatever the case may be. So that's not how I look at it, to be honest with you. But
sure,
yeah, but they've been off Braylon Womack for a while. That he hasn't been on Notre Dame's radar for a while. It's a good pickup for Ohio State. I like Simeon Caldwell. He's a good football player. It's a good pickup for them.
Brandon Plensner. What linebackers is Notre Dame zeroing in on in the 2026 class to join Thomas Davis Jr. besides Kobe Clapper? Who else is high on the Irish now with Caldwell off the board?
Good question. Very fitting question. So that's why I wanted to bring it up after this one. So a couple guys to keep in mind. Obviously, Jacoby Clapper is a kid from St. Xavier in Ohio that Notre Dame is high on. They've been recruiting him for a while. He was on campus last week. Went well. He's going to be back for an official visit. He's not a kid that, as of right now, seems to be in a big hurry to commit, but they're in a great position there. I feel good about where they are ahead of the summer visits. Right now, I anticipate him getting to summer visits, but that could obviously change at some point in time. You know, they continue to work on Talanoa Illy. They're still recruiting him there. They're trailing other schools, but they're still pushing hard for him. And another guy that I think they're in a great spot for still, again, work to be done, not a done deal. Other schools are in a great place, but Tank King, he's going to be back for an unofficial visit. He's going to take another official visit. He's been on campus multiple times. He's kind of a quiet kid, doesn't talk a whole lot, so that's why there's not a lot out there on him. But, you know, I would say Notre Dame is comfortably in his top three. I would say right now, not official top three, but of just who I think the three schools that have the best shot for him, they're in that conversation as well. He's a really good football player for them. They also offered a couple new kids recently. They offered Karan Maycock, who's sort of a rover hybrid combo. He's committed to Florida State. I don't know that that's going to go anywhere. They offered a kid from Arizona that I love on film named Bo Jandro. You'd think he's from New Orleans with that name, right? I mean, it's Beau is his first name, and his last name is Jandreau. Insured by Big. Come on, bro. That should be like, you know, his family somewhere from Louisiana at some point in time. He had kin in Louisiana, but he's a really good football player. He likes Notre Dame, but it's early. He hasn't been on campus. Like, it's very early in that recruitment. They offered a kid from Texas named Jordan Davis. Very raw kid. He's a homeschooled kid. And in some areas, homeschool kids will play for the local high school still. But he plays for like the homeschool association. Very poor competition, like very poor. But he's like a man amongst boys in that group. Super raw, but a lot of athleticism, a lot of potential. And honestly, Trev, in this class, they're not afraid to take a raw upside kid because of what we just talked about in the last segment. Yeah. There's a lot of talent on the staff. I mean, when the 2026 class shows up on campus, Drake Bone will be a senior. Jaden Osberry will be a redshirt junior. Kingston will be a true junior. Madden will be a true sophomore. Bodie Cahoon will be a redshirt sophomore. Teddy Rizak will be a redshirt sophomore. Kahanu Kia will also have a couple years of eligibility left. Josiah Key will be a redshirt freshman. Anthony Sack will either be a true sophomore or redshirt freshman. So the point is, when this class shows up, there's a lot of dudes that are still going to be here. Jaylen Sneed's the only guy that's out of eligibility after 25. Actually, no, he's not. He still has another year left.
He'll be a redshirt senior if he elects to come back.
He'll be done the year. Him and Drake are the only guys that'll be done the year after the 26 class gets here. So they'll all be done after 26 eligibility was. Everybody else can come back in 27. So you're willing to take more chances on certain guys, which is why you're seeing them go after a couple of these guys like a Jordan Davis, because there's a lot of upside. It's not a great linebacker class overall. Some of the guys that were on the board, they're not guys the staff really pushed for because they just aren't great fits. And then, of course, you had some guys that just weren't overly interested, some guys that you lost on. But the board is still good. I still like the linebacker board, and I'm also okay with just taking 2 in this class. I always want 3 ideally, but I'm okay with 2. But you've already got Thomas Davis in the class. In between the other guys that I just mentioned, Jacoby Clapper, I love where they're at there. I like where they're at with Tank King. They're battling for Illy, Jandro, Jordan Davis. There's a lot of guys on the board. They're going to be fine at linebacker. That doesn't mean not getting Simeon Caldwell's not a miss. I mean, it's a miss. He's a good football player. There's just other good football players still on the board, and that's what puts them in my opinion, a pretty good spot still, Trev, as they go and close that up and get some of those guys on campus and look to finish that class out. And again, because they already have a top-ranked linebacker already in the class, they only really need 1 more for sure, and then 2 more is probably the most that you're going to see them add in this class. So, yeah, that's kind of
good deal. Andrew Gilmore. Why is it that many on the board are so critical of Anthony Knapp? He was a composite 4-star, Army All-American at Georgia, good football. He was a freshman All-American, and he had a better freshman PFF than Robert Hainsey.
So, Andrew, you keep saying this every show, and I'm going to ask you something. Why aren't you willing to engage with the legitimate criticisms that people make about Anthony Knapp? Why do you always throw stuff like this onto the board instead of actually engaging in the conversation? Okay, so I can't speak for other people. I can tell you what my issues are, and my issues are twofold. Number 1, he's not good in pass pro so far. He's not. And saying he had a better Pro Football Focus grade than Robert Hainsey misses a couple very key ingredients. Number 1 is the fewer snaps you play, the harder it is for your grade at certain positions to be higher. Robert Hainsey rotated in 2017. He didn't start full time. That's going to impact the potential ceiling for your grade when you're playing starter snaps or against starters and you're playing half the time. Okay, it's just the reality of it. His pressures allowed on a per snap basis were better than Robert Hainsey's. Point to that. Don't talk to me about PFF grades, which I think are garbage. But I don't know that I've ever said Anthony Knapp sucks. I've never said he's trash. I've never said he can't play at Notre Dame. I've said I don't think he's a left tackle because he's not good in space right now. Could that change? Of course it could. I have said many times he was their most dominant run blocker for stretches of the season. I don't know that anyone in the chat has ever disagreed with me on that, ever. You just have a tendency to focus on being either a contrarian to what the consensus is, which I actually don't have a problem with because I kind of get bored when we're all saying the same exact thing. I like there being some contrarian aspect of it. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy your contributions, Andrew, even when you frustrate me sometimes. But the other thing too is like, you can't ignore the struggles he had in pass pro. You could say now he's going to get better, fair. He's going to get better. He's not going to be the same version of himself for 4 years. I've never seen that happen before with a kid with talent. Like I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade. So it's not like I'm sitting there like trying to confirm, I thought he sucked, and so I'm kind of trying to confirm that I was right about his rank. It's nonsense. Once a guy gets here, it doesn't matter what your ranking was. It matters what you're doing here now. I don't care a whole lot about being a freshman All-American. I don't care about his high school ranking. I don't care about him being an Army All-American. None of those things mean a thing to me. Because here's the reality of it. Guys who a lot of people want. So if you're going to use this as an example, okay, who do most people want to replace him in the starting lineup? Gerby Lambert or Charles Jagasaw. What was their high school ranking compared to Anthony Knapp's? pretty sure they were all ranked a lot higher than Anthony Knapp coming out of high school. So if you want, and they were both, either Under Armour or Army All-American. So if we're going to use that as an example, let's look at Anthony Knapp's ranking coming out of high school, and we'll compare it to Gerby Lambert coming out of high school as well. So again, you say these things without acknowledging any of the legitimate context or arguments that people make. So if you want to talk to me about, Army All-American, it's irrelevant because the other guys that people are talking about were also those things. Wasn't Styles Prescott? Didn't he play in one of those All-Star games too? Or was he hurt?
So.
So Anthony Knapp coming out of high school, the 247 composite ranking, he was a 4-star, the number 332 player in the country. Gerby Lambert coming out of high school was a composite 4-star, the number 46 player in the country. Charles Jagusah was a 4-star, and he was the number 61 composite player in the country. So, most of those things there are completely irrelevant to the conversation because the other part is we don't know how those other guys would have played. So I would rather you engage in the conversation of why people have concerns about him as opposed to throwing out stuff like this, which really tells us nothing. So he was a freshman All-American. Okay, could he protect the quarterback or not? Could he protect Riley Leonard's blind side or not? That's all that matters. All the other stuff is fluff. Does he project to play that position or not? You may think he does, and that's totally fair, and you may end up being right. We may look back here in 3 years, and Anthony Knapp's a first-team All-American at left tackle, and people like you are like, remember all you haters when he was – and you'll be right. Talk that talk, right? Throw that in our face. I love that. I hope that you're right in that instance. But the other thing that I've said is not necessarily criticism of Anthony Knapp. It's a criticism of Joe Rudolph. And it's also acknowledging that I think Anthony Knapp can be a good offensive tackle. I've said that. I think he can be a good offensive tackle in time. I think he can be a really good interior player. And I'm a fan of putting guys in positions where they can maximize their potential, which is why, even though I think he's your best left tackle on the team right now, I'm not railing on Joe Rudolph for putting Charles Jagusah at guard because I think he could be a really good left tackle in college. I think he could be an elite, best in the game guard. You don't hear me banging on him for that. So if I'm going to say that, then I have to also you have to be willing to acknowledge that maybe my comments about Anthony Knapp aren't just about being critical of him. He deserves criticism for the play that he had because I don't care about freshman All-American. I'm trying to have Notre Dame win a title. And his play at left tackle wasn't good enough last season. I think everyone should be able to admit that. You should also be willing to admit that if you're someone who's always banging on Anthony Knapp, my frustration on the other side, Andrew, is the people that just refuse to give Anthony Knapp any credit for the good things he did last year, who are completely unwilling to acknowledge that, in fact, maybe he'll be better in year 2 than he was in year 1. That frustrates the heck out of me. And so, Andrew, I kind of understand people that want to defend Anthony Knapp because it's like with a lot of things we talk about, Trev. There's no kind of rational middle ground in this conversation. It's either throwing around a bunch of things like Andrew's doing here, which none of really tell us anything about how well he played this year, or if he played at a championship caliber, which is the standard. It's either that without engaging the real discussion of his play, or they jump to the other extreme of he sucked, he was terrible, he can't play there, he won't get better. None of those things are true. He struggled in pass pro at times. He was also really good in run the game at times, which is part of the reason I don't want to play left tackle anymore, because I think you want to play to those strengths. So that's what frustrates me. The whole discussion of Anthony Knapp frustrates me. It really does, because it's hard to have an honest conversation about him at left tackle. I mean, you have people on the board saying if Anthony Knapp starts at left tackle, they're going to go 8-4 this year. What? I just watched them go 14-1. Yeah, but they don't have Riley Leonard. You're telling me that not having Riley Leonard compared to whoever's a quarterback, if Anthony Knapp's the same player, is going to result in them going from 14 wins, 11 in the regular season, to 8 against that schedule? You're being emotional now. That's not a realistic criticism. That you've now jumped off the cliff in the opposite direction. That's what frustrates me. And the thing that hurts Anthony Knapp right now is he's not out there to prove anybody different because he's injured. It's not his fault. So it's not like, hey, man, Anthony Knapp's really taking a jump this spring like we've talked about other guys who maybe struggled last year. So the whole conversation frustrates me, Andrew, but I feel like nothing you just said at all speaks to any legitimate criticisms. And also, Trev, I'm pretty sure I'm the one, when we had the O-line conversation last week, that talked about how much better his Pro Football Focus numbers were compared to Robert Hainsey, and also pointed out how Robert Hainsey made a huge jump in year 2 and year 3 and used that to defend Anthony Knapp. So, again, Pro Football Focus, if you want to look at Pro Football Focus data, pressures, and things like that, go for it. Using Pro Football Focus grades is nonsense, because I'd like to remind you that I think it was 2020, Pro Football Focus, I'm going to point this out because I love banging on them for this, because some of their stuff is just absolutely absurd. But in 2020, Pro Football Focus gave Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah a grade of 79.7 and gave Kyle Hamilton a grade of 76.7. For context, that same year, Clemson, who Notre Dame beat once, lost to a second time, they would have had five players with a higher grade than Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, including 3 regulars. They would have had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 starters with a higher grade than Kyle Hamilton in 2020. So I don't care about grades. Their grades suck. Their data acquisition is very good. So you want to point to that, as I did, to defend Anthony Knapp and compare him to Robert Hainsey, that's totally fine. But I would just rather you engage in things that mean something. Hey, go look at Anthony Knapp's pressure numbers in his last 5 starts. Go look at Anthony Knapp's pressure numbers from the minute Billy Schrouth got inserted into the starting lineup to before. And if you did that, man, we're going to have a much different conversation. And that's where I think some of my frustration about the Anthony Knapp conversation comes from, Trev, is because not enough people are willing to admit that yes, it's frustrating at times with certain aspects of Anthony Knapp's play. But it's also frustrating when people are not even willing to give him credit for some of the things he actually did. And that's one of the complaints that I have. But if you're going to use Pro Football Focus grades, I just want to remind you that Anthony Knapp had a pass blocking grade this year of 47.9. Just want to remind you of that. And Robert Hainsey's pass blocking grade when he was a freshman was 65.5. So using the data that you want to go with, 65.5 freshman year pass blocking grade to 47.5 pass blocking grade for a left tackle. So even your own desired data does not support a case for, gee, why aren't we all jumping up and down to defend this kid? He's got to get 18 points higher to match what Robert Hainsey was as a freshman from a pass blocking grade. Using your desired data, Pro Football Focus. So why was Anthony Knapp so much higher than overall? Well, a big part of that is because Anthony Knapp's a really good freaking run blocker. I mean, that's going to be a big difference between the two. And so I just but I'm not going to use that as an example, because I don't think that Robert Hainsey's performance was so much greater than Anthony's Knapp's that it should have been 17 points higher. But you want to know, if you want to use Pro Football Focus data to talk about why I'm higher on moving him inside, Robert Hainsey's run blocking grade for his freshman year at Notre Dame was 56.4. Anthony Knapp's was 69.2. That's why if PFF's grades are indicative of, if I grant your premise that they're indicative of performance, that number right there is why I think Anthony Knapp should be inside. And that's where most people are. Very few people will sit there and say Anthony Knapp should never be starting for Notre Dame. Those are some flamethrowers. The people that just bang on him all the time at tackle, they'll all say, move him inside and let him compete there because he could be really good there. And that's where I would rather that conversation be, as opposed to throwing out things that are just irrelevant and don't really speak to his actual performance. Because, Andrew, I know you know football. You've said enough things over these years. I know you know football. I know you can make a better argument than a guy being a composite 4-star, irrelevant, an Army All-American, irrelevant, freshman All-American, good record. I mean, it's a good achievement. Doesn't really speak to how well he played, because we always talk about how the All-American list and this list are kind of crap anyway whenever a Notre Dame player gets screwed over. And then better Pro Football Focus numbers, I know you can make a better argument for that. I've made better arguments for him than that.
Peter Frybert, will a number 1 wide receiver be determined after the blue gold game, or is it already given that Salty Virginia Peanuts crush? Jaden Greathouse is a presumed wide receiver 1.
Well, Peter, Trev, I just talked for like 45 straight minutes. I want to you answer this one first, and then I'll, if I have more to add, I'll go ahead and add more to it.
I mean, as of right now, sure. Just based on the makeup of the room, we just spent the first part of the show talking about who's there right now and what is the state of that room. And right now, the state of that room is Will Pauling at 75%, Jordan Faison, who's kind of a part-time, slightly above part-time receiver, a bunch of redshirt freshmen and 3 true freshmen, and Jaden Greathouse. And so after that game, sure, I think right now I view Jaden Greathouse as the only person returning who has like a solidified starting spot in the wide receiver rotation. So if that's going to be your metric of he's wide receiver 1, potentially, but I don't view it as such. Like, if you want to throw in stats, like, I don't know if Jaden Greathouse is going to be wide receiver 1 when all is said and done in 2025. You know, if like we're just going based on seniority, then Emeka Egbuka was Ohio State's wide receiver 1 last season, and it was not. It was Jeremiah Smith. And so after the blue gold game, I don't think receiver is a position where the team is evaluating, hey, after April 12th, we got to have a guy. Because I think the coaching staff knows that they're going to get Micah Gilbert back. They know that they're going to get Will Pauling at 100%. They know that lacrosse will end for Jordan Faison. They know Malachi Fields will be on campus at this point in time. So I don't think so, Peter. I don't think it's something where if Notre Dame's coaching staff had a priority list going into the blue gold game, I don't think that we got to name a wide receiver 1 go-to guy after April 12th. I don't even know if it's on the list. And if it is, I think it's relatively low on the list. I think a lot of it is going to be, hey, will Cam Williams make that jump? Will Logan Salate make that jump? What does Elijah Burrus look like in a game setting? You know, what does KK Smith look like in this situation? What will Will Pauling's capacity be to play, if at all, in the blue gold game? I think that's going to be more their focus than stepping away from April 12th and saying, hey, Jaden Greathouse is for sure the guy, because I think there's a little bit of that recognition already, the state of the room of what it's in right now. So that's where I'm at with that one.
I also will say, I don't really care about a wide receiver 1 stepping up. I care about playmakers stepping up. And ideally, because there is no Jeremiah Smith on this team, first of all. But even then, how many times did Jeremiah Smith not really do a whole lot and somebody else had to step up and perform? It happened more than once, and more than just the Texas game. If you just have like a wide receiver 1 and you know, teams can kind of take that guy out of the game and go make some plays and say, hey, look, if you know, take this guy out. But the other thing too is, depending on what you're playing defensively, it's going to have a big impact on, you know, where the ball's going. What they need is impact players at all 3 spots to really take this thing to another level. And that's what I'm excited about. It's not about, you know, wide receiver 1, because some games it'll be Jaden Greathouse. There's no doubt in my mind. Yep. Some games it'll be Jaden Greathouse. In other games, it'll be Malachi Fields. In other games, it might be Jordan Faison. And in another game, maybe Will Pauling's going off or another player's going off. At the end of the day, you just need guys to play to a level of consistency that really allows this football team to go out there and be the dominant squad that they need to be at that position. there's also going to be situational times where, I don't want a number one wide receiver step up, but I do love it on third down, knowing that number one's pretty hard to stop on third down, right? Or in the red zone, this guy's really difficult. Or against teams that play this type of coverage, that means this guy's going to have a big game because he's great against that. There's all types of situations where your receiver number one is not going to be able to be your receiver number one. I'll give you an example from my coaching history. We were playing a team, I think it was St. Peter's. When I was at Duquesne, we had we actually had 5 really good receivers, but we had 3 especially that were just more productive, were our top 3 producers. And the one guy we had, his name was Yarden Brantley, really fast kid. I think he ran like a 4.45, something like that, 4.4 something for the Eagles. They signed him out of college, but he was just a big time player. Averaged about like 18, 19 yards a catch. And we played this team that basically was just like, we're not going to let Yarden Brantley beat us. And so they literally would put a safety over top of him wherever he lined up. Well, normally Yarden was our Z. And so we have him at Z, Randy Vlahovic at slot, and then Michael Warfield was our boundary guy. So I recognized pretty early in the game that, hey, dude, they're just taking this safety and just going over top of Yarden wherever he goes. So we just started using that to our advantage. And we went out, and Yarden, I think, I'm going to have to find the stats for that game. I think Yarden had something like 3 catches for 6 yards, something like that during the game. But when you look back and look at, like, I think Randy had like 9 catches or something like that. Michael had over 100 catches. Like, we lit that team up, because then we could use that to our advantage to say, if they're going to put all their attention here, then other guys are going to step up. But here's the deal. If we didn't have guys as good as Randy and especially Michael and even Lauren Cooley coming off the bench, when we go 4 receivers, then if they could take Yarden out of the game and we didn't have other wide receiver 1 talents, then we're going to struggle, because they were able to take our dude out of the game. And that's why I say I don't really care as much about wide receiver 1, because the defense ultimately is going to determine each week who they view as wide receiver 1. And you've got to be able to figure that out and find ways to get that guy the ball still. And I use an extreme example. I don't think any Division I coach would be that stupid to do what they did. But there are going to be times where, like, Texas was like, we are not going to let Jeremiah Smith beat us. So somebody else better step up and beat us. And the receivers struggled to do that. But Travion Henderson did. And that's going to be the key. So I need to see that more so than just one guy stepping up to be the guy. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Adam Garcia, what is the number 1 priority Notre Dame needs to get taken care of in order to win a national championship? And what do you think is the timeline for this?
I think it's the pass game has to become more impactful. I think that's what it comes down to. That, you know what, Trevin, I even think you could I'll give one on offense, one on defense, because I don't think it's as simple as just one thing. The one thing that I feel confident, the pass game has to be better. On top of everything else staying as good as it was. Like, you can't get better in the pass game and then your run game starts averaging 4.9 yards a carry. Keep the strengths you have and then throw the ball better. I think defensively, it's just keep doing what you're doing with one exception. And it's not stop the run better. I'd like for them to improve stopping the run better, but I still think the biggest thing this team needs is the ability to rush the quarterback with their front. That is still something that I think has to get better for this team to go out there and win a championship and be a consistent year after year after year contender for championships. Your edge has to get more impactful and dynamic. You have to. And what's the timeline for both of those things getting better? I mean, we should start to see some of that in 2025. I mean, honestly, for the pass game and the pass rush, I think the peak for those two is more 2026. We should see improvement in 2025 in that area, certainly. And not just because of the quarterback, but the quarterback's going to have a lot better weapons to throw to, in my opinion. should have a better pass protecting offensive line, in my opinion. So it's not all about just the quarterback's got to be better. That's why I said the pass game's got to be better, because I don't want to say quarterback because Riley Leonard just took them to the title game. The pass game has got to get better. I think the pass rush should also be improved this year, but I kind of look at year 2 removed from the injury for Boubacar, look at junior version of Bryce Young, that kind of, junior version of Logan Thomas, Josh Burnham maybe going into a 5th year. That's when I think you're going to really see the pass rush explode, on top of the improvements that we will see improvements, in my opinion, in 2025. I have no doubt in my mind that we will see pass rush improvement from the front in 2025. But 2026 for both of those areas is probably when I think you'll really see it play at a championship caliber. They don't need the pass game to be championship caliber in 2025. They just need it to be better and more consistent, as long as the run game keeps, doing what it's capable of doing. Defensively, you don't need the pass rush to look like you've got a bunch of Abdul Carters to win a championship in 2025, because they're so good in some other areas. But it can be those things can be the driving force behind a championship, more so in 2026, as opposed to being complementary pieces in 2025. But I do think you'll see improvement. Do you agree with that, Trev, that you should start to see noticeable improvement in those areas in 2025, or do you think it's really going to be 26 that we even see that?
No, 2025 is a good timeline for it. For me, 2 big facets in the pass game specifically need to get better. Pass protection the last 2 seasons has not been consistent for Notre Dame. And and it's one of those where it's like, I don't know which one makes it more disheartening. Is it, year 1 or year 2 of Joe Rudolph with having 2 NFL guys at tackle and Joe Alt, Blake Fisher, or is it last season where, now he is well embedded within the program and you still had the struggles that you had? And when I mean struggles, I don't mean they had to start a left tackle start a true freshman left tackle in week 1. I mean, that's not really a concern of mine. You're not able to pick up twists and stunts, basic things. And that was the case throughout the entire season. I watched Pat Coogan basically wave a checkered flag to Cody Simon on a pressure in the national championship game. I'm not talking about the issues that they had against Texas A&M. So that's an issue, and it absolutely needs fixed. Because my second point is I think they need a big name to step up in as a pass catcher. And I say pass catcher because it could be tight end, it could be wide receiver. But that can't happen unless pass protection gets shored up, especially when you don't have a dynamic playmaker in the backfield with his legs like what Riley Leonard was in 2024. But the common theme that any team that has won a national championship really in the last decade has had a big name in the passing game. The outlier is Michigan. And I'm not going to use Michigan as the reference because, again, that was the one-off. But everybody else had. Ohio State last year, spoiler riches at the receiver position. When Georgia did it, they had Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell and guys that contributed that way. And then, you talk about, Bama in 20 had Devontae Smith. LSU in 19 had 3 guys that all would have been wide receiver ones at any school that they would have went to that year outside of Alabama. And so, I think on offense, they need a big name guy to step up in the pass game from a pass catching perspective. Defensively, I'm right there with you. They need to be able to generate some sort of pass rush consistently. Secondary is great.
The secondary,
yes. Yeah. Yes. But the secondary's been great with an inconsistent pass rush. But look at the national championship game from this last season. Will Howard could have set up camp and made a meal for the entire offense with how much time he had to throw in the national championship. Got to be able to generate a pass rush. I'm with you. Kevin O'Rourke, please provide your perspective on how the Notre Dame coaches can objectively, as possible, determine who QB1 will be. With the talent so close, what do you think the coaches look for to make their selection?
You track how they perform every day. You almost keep stats like you would normally. You track what was their completion percentage, what was their yards per attempt, who was the best at spreading the ball around. Was this guy, just because you were 78% and everybody else was 72%, doesn't mean you were the best if 90% of your completions are check downs and you're missing opportunity. So it's 3rd and 10 and you complete a 5-yard pass because you took the check down. Yeah, then okay, fine. That doesn't mean anything to me unless we're in 2-down territory. You know, I mean, if we're at the plus 40 and it's 3rd and 11 and you complete a check down to a back, like Riley Leonard did that, I think it was against Indiana. And you let them get it, 5-6 yards. Now you're in 4-down territory. You got a chance to go for a 4th down. That's different. But just like in a normal 3rd and 10 at your own 35 and you just take a check down, that it may have been the right decision, but it's not going to be like, well, your completion percentage was great, and that's all you're doing, or it's 1st and 10 and you're doing nothing but throwing to the backs all the time, that kind of thing. So you look at those things, you look at consistency. Hey, this guy had really good numbers this spring, but he was at 52% this day and he was at 85% that day. Just constantly up and down performance. That may not go well for a certain guy in a battle that's close. You're going to look at how the offense moves with those players in it. Like, the first team offense was kind of the same with all of them, but the second team offense really moved with that guy. That may matter to you. Like, yeah, when you're out there with the first team offensive line and Jeremiah Love and Eli Raridan, and Jaden Greathouse, you all kind of did your thing. But this cat went out there with the number 2 offense, man, and they would just go up and down the field and score. That's something that can factor into it. Command of the huddle, command of the team, who's putting in the work and off the field. Those things all factor into it. How do the players react and rally around those players on the field? I don't care what they do in the locker room. I mean, the number 3 quarterback could be the most popular guy on the team. Don't care. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how they react to him on the field. That's going to be a big thing. And so all those things factor in to it. On top of stats, also looking at the film matters. Like, okay, these numbers are similar, but projecting to a game situation, this guy constantly gets the ball out sooner. This guy gets the ball with more velocity. This guy is better here. This guy's better there. This guy may have had slightly inferior passing stats, but he got sacked 3 times all spring and scrambled this many times, whereas these guys got sacked 3 times as high. That kind of negates the slight advantage they have in the pass game. That's something that may get factored into the equation. All those things are part of the equation. Who's consistently best at getting the checks made that need to get made, and those are all things that factor into the decision that you're going to make when you're talking about who's going to be the starting quarterback. And at the end of the day, it ultimately, I don't think, will be close. The question is going to be when. It'll become obvious at some point in time. The question is when. That's when it'll be. Somebody eventually will emerge and be that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Josh Buffo, for what we know about all 3 quarterbacks at this moment, what do you say would be the strongest selling point for them to all be starters, and what are their greatest weaknesses for them to be backups?
I don't know that any of these guys have a weakness as a backup, if I'm reading that correctly. I may not be.
I took that as like that would cause them to be a backup. I suppose.
Okay. If that's the case, then that's a little different. So what would be the strongest selling point to be starters? Just go oldest to youngest. For Steve Angeli, experience is going to be a big thing for him, and leadership. Those are the 2 selling points for Steve Angeli. If he's your starting quarterback, you've got someone that has proven that they are not going to wilt under pressure. Like, meaning emotional pressure, external pressure. Obviously, he doesn't deal well with literal football pressure, as we've seen. He takes a lot of sacks, but you can live with that if this guy's going to answer the bell and he's going to shake that sack off and come back on the very next play and make the throw that he needs to make, right? So experience and leadership. You're getting those 2 intangibles with Steve Angeli. You don't know that with the other 2 guys, and there's nothing those guys can do to change that until they're the starter. The weakness for Steve Angeli is just tools. His tools are significantly inferior to the other quarterbacks. Trevor, I think it was very eye-opening for you because I asked you about this after the first practice when you see them all 3 throw next to each other. And you could even throw Blake Hebert in there. As I keep saying, Blake Hebert is an impressive young man as well, but you saw it. they'll all drop back at the same time, and then they start to go through their motion, and Steve's ball always comes out way last because he's got a very long delivery, very long triggers, and the ball just comes out later than the others, and he doesn't have the juice to overcome that and get the ball out. His ball placement's not ideal. He's got probably the third strongest arm of the three in contention. The tools, and he's probably the least athletic of the three in contention, but that's not something that like, it's not like he's a bad athlete. He's a good athlete. It's just, he's noticeably less athletic than the other two guys. So that's just the reality of it. Y'all don't even bring that bull crap that Craig McElroy said. Don't even bring that into the chat. That was so absurd. I'll send you the link, Trev, because it looks like you didn't hear him say that, but I'll send it.
No, I did.
Okay. Just take that mess out of here. We're trying to have a real football conversation here. With Kenny, the biggest selling point for him is the tools. I mean, Kenny's got a strong arm, quick release, can power the ball. He's a good athlete. I'm still not sold that Kenny's like the runner that people say that he is, because we need to kind of see that. Those are just things that you need to see from him. But man, but he's still a really good athlete. He can scramble. We have seen that. We saw that in the spring game. We saw that in the touchdown run against Purdue. What I'm saying is he's not going to be like the second coming of Riley Leonard. He's going to be more of an Ian Book type of athlete that'll have a bunch of rushing yards primarily off of scrambles and things like that. I mean, Ian ran for 500 yards one year, and I think he had like 3 designed runs all year. They were like 3rd and 1 outside zones. That's it. It was all scramble yardage. And I think he's more of that. But the physical tools are impressive. I mean, that's the most impressive thing for him. The weakness for him, in my opinion, is consistency and decision-making. The thing that I noticed about Kenny last year is in scrimmage, and we won't know that if he's improved in that until we get to Saturday and then the blue gold game. Kenny's a slow starter. He would make a couple really bad decisions early in practice and early in the scrimmage. And, and then he did in the blue gold game with the really bad pick to Luke Talich, where he just kind of chucked the ball up. Kenny's got to be more locked in early, which is a thing that is not surprising because a lot of young guys have that struggle. So I'm not surprised by it. And I won't be shocked if he's worked past that a little bit. But even some of the people I've talked to about the spring, I've talked to several people like, man, Kenny's best days are special. But he's still a little this, but the tools, man, are just really good. CJ doesn't have the arm power that Kenny has. He has the best ball placement of all the quarterbacks. The big thing about CJ is he processes at an elite level. And he's the most consistent quarterback they have. We saw that last spring, and that's what I'm hearing again this spring is just that consistency. He doesn't have he's not going to throw the ball 70 yards like Kenny can. He can power the ball, but not the same way that Kenny can. It's not quite as powerful as Kenny's arm, but it's still good, really good. But the steadiness, the consistency, he snaps the ball off, man. I mean, it comes out real crisp and clean. His ball placement is exceptional, but his ability to process is just different. And that's really what makes that. Like, I didn't have CJ Carr as a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school because he's 6'5", 215, and can throw the ball 75 yards and 100 miles an hour. It was the tools are pretty good, but his ability to process is exceptional. And it's funny is, you speak of the Joe Burrow thing that Greg McElroy said, that was my comparison for CJ coming out of high school stylistically. Because Joe Burrow, when you look at Joe Burrow and you compare him to Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes and some of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, there's a noticeable difference in arm strength and power and that type of thing from him and those other guys. What made Joe Burrow special in college was he was an elite processor. He'd just get the ball where it needed to go, perfect timing and great ball placement. And when I compare CJ to him, it's that stuff. It's not that he's going to be as good as Joe Burrow was and put up the numbers, but it's elite processor, elite feel for the game, elite football IQ, on top of having pretty good physical tools. And that's not meant to diminish him. Like, he didn't have elite tools. Like, Joe Burrow's got very good tools, but he's not Pat Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Lamar Jackson from a physical tool standpoint. And that's why I separate him. He's a different type of quarterback. And that's where I see from CJ. CJ's not a Trevor Lawrence type of 5-star. He's not a Justin Fields type of 5-star. He's more of a Bryce Young type of 5-star. And that's why I like him a lot in that regard. Now, what are the weaknesses for CJ? Experience is really the big one. And is he assertive enough to kind of go win the job? That's it. So that's my Trev. Anything to add to that?
The only other one that I would throw in there, and it sounds like that he's fine, but he is the only quarterback in that room that I think that like had a significant injury, like to his throwing arm, because I don't think Kenny or Steve did. But again, it sounds like a lot of it is fine. Like, it sounds like he's back to just being himself. So I don't view it as that big of a downside, but I do think, like, if we're going to talk about the room as a whole, I do think that is something that is worth noting, is he is the only quarterback in that room that had underwent a significant injury to his throwing arm. So, but outside of that, I'm with you.
I'd be more concerned about that if we hadn't seen him throw since then.
Yeah.
And that's why it's and from what I'm told, it wasn't anything structural like that could potentially. That's like one of my concerns with Carson Beck. It's like, I wasn't super high on him before he had literal structural damage done to his elbow. And it's like, people want to ignore that. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, he just had tendonitis or something, or some bone spurs that had to get removed. You know what I mean? Like, this guy tore a ligament in his elbow in December. So, yeah. All right. Good questions. Good job today so far, everybody. We'll just answer it now. 1 to 10, 10 being very accurate. How accurate is Greg McElroy and his Angeli Burrow take? LOL. If we're being honest, let's really address what he said. I did not take him as saying that he thinks that he has the tools that Joe Burrow did. He said he went from being just a guy to being an impact player. I don't think that he said he's going to go throw for 5,600 yards and 60,000 touchdowns and all that. He said he's going to go from being just a guy to a big-time player. I think he's like a 2. I mean, and I would say that about any of these quarterbacks, comparing them to Joe Burrow. None of these guys are going to – and the thing that was dumb about it is when Joe Burrow was, quote-unquote, just a guy in 2018, he still started an entire season for LSU. So it's so unfair to put that on any of the 3 quarterbacks at Notre Dame, because none of them have played a whole season that I believe ended in the Fiesta Bowl for LSU. I mean, Trev, there's a reason I predicted LSU to be a playoff team that year. You know, because you saw Joe Burrow with what his tools were with a real pass offense, which they didn't have in 2018, but you know, it's a very unfair, silly thing to say. It's pure clickbait. And I actually kind of like J.D. Pickell. I kind of like him. He does decent little quick hitters and stuff. And I like Greg McElroy. But some of the hyperbole that those two guys have given about Steve Angeli lately, J.D. didn't make the Joe Burrow comparison. That was Greg McElroy. But these are two guys who I tend to like. I especially like Greg McElroy. Those were pretty silly week off season. You must not be getting a lot of clicks lately, so let's do something kind of crazy. And guess what? It worked, because I promise you that thing was clicked millions of times.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many other quarterbacks that he could have even used in that scenario that wasn't Joe Burrow. That I just, yeah. Ugh. Kevin Park, is KK capable of returning punts and kickoffs?
Punts, yes. Kickoffs, I'd be a little less apt to put him. He's still thin and not strong, and kick return guys tend to take a little bit more can at times take more punishment than punt return guys. But that strength issue is the thing that's going to hurt him with all of those things. But he was a very good punt returner in high school. I'll tell you a guy that's not on campus right now that I'm looking forward to seeing return punts in fall camp, and that's Dallas Golden. I would absolutely give him a shot to be my starting punt returner in the fall.
Oh, yeah. Bobby, Jesus Follower Reeves, do you think Angeli and Minchie will start for the blue and gold team and then CJ later due to their time at Notre Dame?
I honestly don't know. I would assume that would probably be how it's going to go, Bobby. I mean, I don't know what the teams are going to be, but I would assume that no matter what happened this spring, that you'd see the two veteran guys start the game, and then CJ will work in for one of the two teams, if not both. So yeah. I think that's probably fair.
I wonder if they're going to do something to where maybe all three of the guys play for both teams. If they do some sort of rotation that way. I don't know how much work would go into that, but I don't know if they would, because I feel like whoever has to rotate between each team is at the disadvantage. And so I think it would be interesting to see, like, maybe for a quarter, X quarterback plays with this team, or for a drive they're with this team, and then rotate. I don't know how feasible that is. I don't know if they'll even do it, but yeah. I mean, as far as a pecking order is concerned, if you're going to start and format it a certain way, you go oldest to youngest. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Halloran, what are both of your thoughts on Landau and the strength and conditioning program? It appears guys are putting on good weight and not losing speed and quickness. Some guys also appear to have gotten leaner. Go Irish.
Evaluating Landau is a little bit of a mixed bag, but a lot more good than bad. I mean, I think the fact that Notre Dame was a team that always looked fresher in the second half of games last year, in November and in December and in January. I mean, Notre Dame was the better second half team against Penn State. They were a better second half team against Ohio State. Now, for different reasons. I've said before, Ohio State called off the dogs a little bit on Notre Dame on offense, and that allowed Notre Dame to – but they never called the dogs off on defense. Notre Dame just started ripping on them. And once they did make the decision to call off the dogs, that was a mistake, and Notre Dame was able to take advantage of it and get back in that game where they're a 3rd and 11 stop away from getting the ball back with a chance to tie it. That doesn't happen if you're not in great shape with a pretty young team in game 16. So I think and same thing. I mean, they were the better, faster team, the more conditioned team against Georgia as well. Georgia had that little kind of brief moment they came back, and then Notre Dame just kind of took it to them and just out-physicaled them in that fourth quarter of that game. They were a much more physical team this year than they were last year. I think that was noticeable from game one. They deserve a lot of credit for that. But then the flip side is there was a lot of injuries last year, some of which you can attribute to the strength conditioning program. The high volume of ACL tears concerns me, because I do think there are things you can do strength conditioning-wise that can lead to a high volume of that. Not every ACL is due to strength conditioning. Sometimes it's just bad luck. But it's just abnormal to see that many. I'm not saying it was because of the strength program, but as we said during the season, you got to at least sit down with all your people to decide, is there something that we're doing? Is it the cleats? Is it our stretching program? Is it our work volume? Is it too light? Is it too much? Those are all things that can factor into. You at least have to address it. If that wasn't something that we're talking about, if the injury thing from last year was negated, I don't know what else you do to pick apart what Lauren Landau's done so far. The strength conditioning part has been great. It's the injury prevention that is the red flag. And it's even more of a red flag when you consider that was an issue for the Broncos as well. A reported issue. I don't know that for a fact. I saw somebody write an article one time saying, yeah, that's because a lot of the guys that got hurt were guys that came to the Broncos with an injury history. And then, of course, they got hurt again with the Broncos. That could be it too. But if the same thing happens this year everywhere else, but they have better injury hit luck, then you're going to say this ended up being a home run hire for Marcus Freeman, which was important because they had one of the best in the business 2 years ago in Matt Balis. So, yeah.
Yeah, as of right now, I still love the hire. I mean, Notre Dame Marcus Freeman specifically is adding people to his staff that have NFL experience, and it's been at the right time. You look at a guy like Lauren Landau, he comes in the first season where Notre Dame has to play almost what the equivalent is of an NFL regular season. They went and got an NFL guy with experience of, hey, how do we manage players who have to play 16 games? How do we keep everybody fresh? And to all of Brian's points, I think we saw that on the field. Then, of course, with the hire of Mike Martin, it's okay. Transfer portal, NIL's going crazy. We need more roster management. We need to be proactive. We need a guy with NFL front office experience. And they went out and got a guy like Mike Martin. And so I think that it was a great move. From a strength and conditioning standpoint, I'm willing to say that the hire was great. I think the jury's still out on injury prevention. I think I need another year of that because
pretty
we could
important
be.
part.
Yeah,
pretty important part of it. Yeah,
I'm at the end of the 2025 season. I will have a better gauge of 2024. Sometimes you just have a year with freak injuries, and maybe that's what last season was.
That could be it, right? Because we don't have any other data points, Trev, to look at.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the 2 previous years they were pretty good, and you just have that 1 year to look at, and it's hard to really hold that against them. That's why I haven't said a lot about it, but that's the only concern I have, and that's why I said you get together as a staff, you look over all those things, you analyze everything, and you may come to the conclusion of, guys, this is bad luck. This guy got hurt this way. It was this part of his knee. This guy is because that part of his knee. This other. I mean, you had 2 guys get injured against Purdue that hurt their knees. They both got rolled up on. And I don't know what you can do. Like, I don't know what a strength coach can do to prevent Ashton Cray from getting injured. Jordan Patel and Bubakar's injuries were way weirder. Riley Mills's was way weirder. So those are all just different things you look at and say, it could just be bad luck.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of shoulder injuries. There weren't a lot of neck injuries. There weren't a lot of pulled hamstrings and quads. Those are things where, like, that's what was going on the year before. You're like, you got all these muscle injuries. That's strength conditioning. I don't need a thorough study of your program to know that's a strength conditioning problem.
Yeah.
And this one is different, and you just don't know. You're going to need to see some data over the course of time, and you've got to do your due diligence as a school and institution to make sure there are things you aren't doing that can lead to that, and then you recognize them and address them where it's relevant.
Yeah.
Some of them are like, there's nothing we can do to fix that. Hey, lineman, don't stop moving your feet. That's the coaching point. Oh, lineman, don't lock into the ground and it's always move your feet. This is why you always move your feet. Because when you lock in and the guy rolls up on you, you're going to get knocked down.
Yeah.
I mean, simple as that. If somebody, I've had my knee rolled up on before, but I wasn't planted because I was moving around. Didn't hurt. So it's just a different animal, man.
Mm-hmm. Joseph Barrett, what is going on with Notre Dame's women basketball? They are losing 2/3 of the team due to graduation in the transfer portal. The program is suddenly in scramble mode.
That is more, Joseph, of a Sean Stiers question. So I can't really speak to that. When it comes to the women's basketball team, I'm a fan. I don't cover the team. I talk about them as a fan. I've said this about basketball. My basketball discussions on this channel are that of a fan. I don't know basketball like I know football and baseball. I know more about basketball than like lacrosse and soccer, but it's just different. I look at recruits and I can look at the roster. It's a problem. It's a big red flag. Every situation is different. Like I know Sean talked about how Kate Koval's situation's a little bit different. He talked about that last night. Some of these are very surprising. They are. And you're, like you said, and I agree. I think they're in scramble mode right now. Yeah, it's not good.
No, definitely not good. D-Troll Hunter. Brian, it's a good time to talk about the adjustments they are making on the edge.
Well, you're starting to see a little bit of that in recruiting, Trev, but I think what Notre Dame is eventually going to get to is they're working towards being a team that is not so much true big end viper. I think they want more of just two ends that can stop the run, can rush the passer, and play a similar style of football. Some other adjustments they're making is we're going to see a little bit of a higher percentage of guys on the outside. That's the video I'm working on now, but I'm going through some of their bigger games and charting how often they were inside or outside, because right now my gut is that the big side, the strong side ends played more inside against the tight end. And then when they would flip ends where like the tight end would flip over, you'd see the Viper kind of tucked inside the end or the tight end. So more of, I called it a 6, they call it a 6-eye. You're going to see more lining up outside, I believe, from what they say. This is what the coaches have been saying. This isn't me giving away trade secrets. This is what they verbally said in press conferences. So I'm doing a breakdown on that data, but then also expressing why they're doing that. That'll be more of a message board thing. But in order to do that, you've got to have a little bit of a different type of an end. You need big ends that are more like can do everything, where as opposed to sort of like at times it's like been a guy that's good at one thing, not another. In the past, they would kind of have like they converted Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa to big end in 2021, and Riley played there for a little bit. They want guys that are more of true edge rushers. They'll still do the same stuff they've done, where they'll be tucked inside or even slant inside post snap. You'll see them line up inside, work outside. One of the advantages, I think, is I do believe that this gives you a pass rushing advantage. I didn't always love how tight the techniques were for Notre Dame's edge players when they were rushing the quarterback. 1st and 10, you kind of need that because you're protecting a gap. But when you're trying to then convert that into a pass rush, and you've kind of got to almost loop around because they always had to go outside. They couldn't I think it gives you a little bit more better angles of attack to not only get to the edge, but then to be able to effectively do counter moves. If I'm wider and I'm trying to come at you this way, I now have more of a two-way go. Whereas if I have to kind of come around you, I'm not getting back inside. I'm not DeMarcus Ware. I'm not Von Miller. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't loop and then spin back inside. That's for the freaky guys. This gives them more of just a better angle of attack to get after the quarterback. So, yeah, I think Bryce Young will be good for that. I think all the guys can be good. I think it's going to be beneficial for the whole room. And, yeah, so good question. But I'll have more on that in the boards. And I'm going through the film now. And, like, I've got – so I'll give you one – the one game I have fully broken down, for example, is the Louisville game. And let me give you that data. So, in the Louisville game, the defensive end – or the Viper, if they flipped ends, was lined up in a wide technique 6 snaps against the tight end. Now, if there's no tight end, I don't count it. Or if the tight end's flexed, I don't count it. I'm talking about when there was a tight end either in a wing or an attached position. If the tight end was tucked inside, like in the B gap, I didn't count it. When there was a tight end either in a wing or attached to the line, the defensive end was lined up to the player to the tight end side was lined up in a wide technique 6 times. He was lined up in a head up or inside shade 22 times. Now, I need to do the data for the rest of the playoff. I'm going to do the playoff games because sometimes against certain teams, you're going to do that because of how they play a certain thing. So, and like I know for a fact some of the film I'm going to use is going to be from the Penn State game because I think that tucked inside is a big reason why Penn State was so effective with their stretch stuff. They could just combo block that edge and just drive them outside and then open up run lanes on a stretch, whereas against a wider technique, I can kind of firmly set the edge a little bit better and then force you to get that thing back inside. Or if I'm wider, I can come off and take that D end and wrong arm him into the backfield and force either a spill, which he's got to go around, or forcing a behind-the-line cut, which allows us either the safeties can rally to the ball if it's a spill, or I'm funneling him right back inside. I'm forcing him right back inside of the linebackers if it's a force. I think that gives them a little bit better angles for some of that stuff. Now, some other stuff, it's not as good. If their teams are running a lot of counter, running a lot of trap, I don't want to be wider because I've now opened up the run lane. So there will be some times where it's not as ideal. But I think by and large, having more of a balance, not because like you don't want to go all 9 technique either, in my opinion. Having a little bit of a balance, because like you used to be able to play all 9 technique because you'd had a Sam linebacker tucked inside in a 4-3 defense. Now, if you're all 9 technique, you're asking your inside linebackers to do a lot, cover a lot more gaps. And now you're forcing your safeties to even be more so involved in sort of filling in the box, where when you kind of play more of an inside technique, you know, you're kind of covering the inside gaps, and now you're forcing a lot more spill, which allows your safeties to kind of run downhill and your linebackers to fly to the ball, and you're making the team work laterally. Well, Penn State wanted you to do that. They wanted you to go laterally. I also think it made it a little easier to block the edge in a lot of the quick outside game. What was one of the things we talked about all year? Teams could just quickly get outside the Notre Dame edge players, just with little quick tosses. And this allows you to defend that a little bit better. Like Louisville tried that one time when Kingston was walked up and he blew it up, because he's a little wider, a little more athletic, and he blew it up. That's going to be a little harder for RJ Open to do when he's in a tight 6-eye technique or the Viper to do when he's in a really tight 5 technique, so it certainly changes things a little bit. So good question. Real quick answer for Raymond Harmon. Do you guys think Chris Burgess moves inside or he stays at the end? He'll stay at the end for now. Like with Chris Burgess, I think they'd like for him to be an end. They're just not going to stop his body from blowing up if that's how God made him. You know what I mean? Like if Chris just gets to the strength program and he just like, dude, he's 285 like that, we're not going to work 15 pounds off him to keep him at end. Then he moves inside and he becomes the next Riley Mills at the 3 technique. But they're not going to also, from my understanding, they're not going to force that weight on him either. Where it's like, we need you to be a 3 technique. So like they did with Cole Mullins. So if he ends up a 3 technique, it's because he went the Riley Mills route of his body's just kept getting bigger, naturally bigger. And you've been around you've seen Riley Mills. He's just a massive kid. Yeah. He's not like, he's just big shoulders, big head, big hands, big feet. He's just a big kid. Yeah. Chris Burgess is a lot like that. So you're not going to stop him from blowing up if that's what his body naturally does. Cole Mullins is the opposite. Cole, you decided you wanted him there, so you forced weight onto him, or you're still trying to force weight onto him. They won't do that with Chris Burgess, from what I understand. But right now, end is the plan. There's a chance he can end up growing into an inside guy. Last couple before we get out of here, Trev, I did want to get to a few more of these. This is a really fascinating question.
Andrew Gilmore, if Charlie Weiss of the 2000s was transported to the current college football era of the transfer portal and NIL, would he have been more successful?
Yes, because Charlie could recruit any era. And the getting closer to the NFL model fits him. What was Charlie's thing? When he inherited a team of players that somebody else developed, technically and fundamentally, they were really good. He also had a great quarterback, but he had a pretty darn good quarterback in 08 and 09 too. When he had a team built of guys he recruited as high school players, and he had to teach them how to line up, how to tackle, they weren't as good because he didn't care. He didn't focus as much on fundamentals, the technical side of the game. Because the NFL, you expect guys to kind of already be there. That's what college is for. Now he can go out and get a bunch of portal guys who have already been coached up by somebody else, and just now it's about the scheme. And I think he'd have been more consistent than he was then. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah. I never thought of that, Andrew. Like that thought never crossed my mind until you asked that question. I'm like, dude, that makes a lot of sense. I think he'd be really good at it. You know who else I think would be really good in today's portal era? Lou Holtz and Vinny Serrato. Vinny would have a field day recruiting to Notre Dame in this era where you can pay players. He would be getting, oh my goodness. Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah. But yeah, I never thought of that, Trev, until Andrew asked. I never thought Charlie Weiss would be really good in this era, but he really would. It's more of a passing game, NFL scheme into era as well. I think he would have been much better if you could put that version of Charlie, younger, healthier, fresh out of the NFL, into today's era. Or if that era had NIL, this might be a better way of putting it. If that era had the portal and the NIL like they do now, how would Charlie have done? Could you imagine the portal kids that would have come to Notre Dame in 2007 after what Notre Dame did the 2 previous years? They're on Sports Illustrated and all this kind of stuff. Oh yeah. They would have done. They'd have cleaned up because Charlie could recruit, man. Like that's the thing about Charlie is that dude could recruit, man. He could. I mean, you meet him, you're like, how's this guy a good recruiter? I don't know, but it worked. I mean, he could do it. He'd give you one of these. He's like sitting there with his 4 rings on his hand as you're talking to him. He's got his 4 Super Bowl rings right there. And you're like, okay, yeah, this guy can do some things. Yep. This guy can do some things. Yeah. Good one. And then I think that is it. Yeah, that's going to be it for today. We went a little over an hour, Trev, but I wanted to get to the last couple of those. Those were some really good submissions I wanted to get to today. But you know what? If I didn't get to your question, Trev, you know what they can do? They can bring that question in tomorrow because we're going to have a full mailbag tomorrow, everybody. We're going to get started at 1:00. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. There's a chance that at the beginning of the show, I may have to dip out for a couple minutes. My wife has been out of town since for a week now, and she's going to be coming home tomorrow. If she gets home after the show started, I will not be waiting another 3 hours to go say hi to my wife. So I will have to pause for a second, go say hi to Ange. I'll come back, but hopefully she's going to get back before the show starts. That would be ideal. But I'm looking forward to tomorrow's mailbag, Trev. It's going to be a blast, and we obviously will have practice. We'll have a post-practice show on Saturday as well. So it's going to be a fun week. On your way out, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening to us on any podcast platform. But as always, the best way to support Irish Breakdown, the best way to have access to all the content, all the intel that we have is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. For Trevor, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your show. 5 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk, Sean and Vince. Check them out, and we'll see you all again tomorrow at 1 o'clock for our Friday mailbag. Thanks for being with us today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.